my portfolio. Back then, I was young and arrogant, only successful in the first place because my father had given me such a sizable loan to launch my empire back in the mid-90s. I was prone to jumping into things without properly thinking them through, and that had served me well time and time again. I had been lucky with my investments. My luck was about to run out. I remember seeing Fun Kingdom in the newspaper. This old abandoned theme park had been gathering dust for 4 years, since its abrupt closure in 1997. There were red flags here, of course. I did my research and I should have paid more note to the strangeness of the park's abandonment. It had been, by all measures, a successful business for 20 years. Revenue was growing year on year. The local area had been stunned by the park's notice that it would cease operations in late 97. But as I said, I was young and dumb. I didn't think about the suspiciousness of a successful business abruptly closing down. I was simply glad to see the bare-bones framework of a theme park already close to operational, needing only some safety checks and light maintenance before it was ready to go. And with the name Fun Kingdom still being in people's minds, and the popularity of the place only 4 years prior, I saw this as a no-lose investment. The previous owners had done all the work for me. Here was a tried and tested business model, ready to go, and all I needed to do was buy my way in. The information at the bottom of the advert should certainly have clued me in to the peculiarity of it all. Ring the following number to talk price. No time wasters. Looking for immediate sale. I rang the number. A man answered.
Herbert Smith, how may I help you?
Hi, I said. My name is Fred Langley. I'm calling about the ad in the paper for Fun Kingdom. I'm an interested buyer.
Fantastic. Would you like for me to arrange an appointment between our lawyers?
But I wasn't a complete fool. Well, before all of that, I was wondering whether I might be able to book a viewing of the park itself. There hung a few moments of silence in the air, heavy, and then Herbert sighed.
Did you read the advert, Fred?
I did.
So you saw the part about an immediate sale.
This was strange, even to an investor as young and inexperienced as me. Well, yeah, I saw that, I said, but...
And no time wasters.
Well, yes, I saw that part too. But surely you understand why I would want to actually view the property before we talk contracts. I mean, I need to know what I'm actually buying. You wouldn't buy a house without viewing it first, would you? All I have to go by is the text. You didn't include any pictures in the...
All right,
Herbert interrupted. He sounded beyond frustrated. His earlier relief at my having called at all was long gone. I should have hung up the phone there and then.
Fine. We'll arrange a viewing at Fun Kingdom today.
I raised my brows. Today? He sighed.
Oh, for the love of...
No, today's fine, I said. Why was this dude being such a tool? I was just shocked that you could squeeze me in so soon.
How does 2 o'clock work for you?
He asked.
The sun will be setting soon. We'll want to be quick.
Sure, that gives me about a half an hour to drive over. I'll see you then.
Right. And we'll talk contract while you're there.
I didn't want to tell him that this was all a little premature, as I'd already been scolded for time wasting once, so I simply opted to say nothing, and the man hung up the call. I let out a long breath, realizing that I had been holding it for a few seconds. I had never had such a struggle with business dealings in the past, but I reminded myself that my other fairgrounds, bought with Papa's money, had all been small fry. The dealings had been simple because there wasn't much to the land and the equipment involved. Fun Kingdom, on the other hand, was a large theme park. I had been there as a kid with my father, and it had blown me away. This would be by far the biggest investment that I had ever made, and it would take my empire to dizzying new heights. I was sure of that. I was willing to swallow my pride a little and deal with this grouchy old curmudgeon, Herbert Smith, just to get my hands on Fun Kingdom. And then again, he was the one who sounded desperate. His frustration was coming only from the fact that I wouldn't sign the contract sooner, wouldn't sign it without question. It was beyond bizarre to expect an investor to buy property without even viewing it. These were the early days of the internet, so there wasn't even a Fun Kingdom website to view, to get a good look at the current state of the place. I had seen it back in its heyday, but I knew that it wouldn't be quite in the same condition after 4 years left to gather dust. I wanted to see whether it fit the bill before rushing into a decision, even though I was fairly certain that I would still buy the property, even if it were a run-down and ramshackle mess. The inspection was more for the sake of maintaining my image as a serious buyer in truth. I was more than happy to rush through the proceedings and sign on the dotted line. I'm glad I didn't. I pulled into the car park a few minutes before 2 o'clock in the afternoon, as gray clouds were parting to let the winter sun through. That was a good omen, I hoped. And the sun was starting to climb down from the sky, casting long shades from the tall castle walls, bracing either side of the wrought iron gate, above which Fun Kingdom was spelled in bold, rusting letters. And despite me being early, Herbert was already impatiently tapping his foot against the weed-ridden tarmac of the car park, arms folded as he waited for me to park up and get out. I hurried over to the old man with disheveled gray hair and rimmed glasses, and I tried my best to mend the wounds of our admittedly rocky start. "Hey Herbert, I'm Fred." Obviously. Right. Yeah, he was going to continue to be an ass. Best to just get through this as painlessly as possible, I decided. "So, shall we take a quick look around?" I asked, putting the emphasis on quick. And Herbert seemed to like that, as his sulk very nearly curled up into a smile, but stopped at a horizontal line. I would take that as neutral and nonchalant was better than grouchy. "This way," he said, motioning with a hand as he led me over to the gate. He fumbled with a set of keys and thrust one into the padlock. Which then came open with a not-so-satisfying groan, as if wondering why anybody would bother to return to this place. And it was, I quickly realized, in a dire condition. The car park was the precursor. The entrance to the theme park was all cracked past, spilling out weeds and moss and boarded-up concession stands. The dodgems were vandalized with graffiti, featuring a number of creative expletives from youths who had broken into the theme park over the years. The wooden roof of one stall had crumbled inwards, perhaps in one of the heavy storms that we had the year prior. "Oh, it just needs a bit of TLC," Herbert said, hurrying me along the weed-ridden path. "It really is a steal. We're only asking for $50,000. And that perked me up. I had surely misheard him. $50,000. Yep. As a deposit, I asked. "No, that's the total sum. $50,000 and the entire place is yours." "The whole park? That doesn't sound right, sir." "Well, it is," he said, coming to a stop outside the walls to the inner castle, which had always been one of my favorite sections of the park. It was home to terrifyingly tall roller coasters, and the ghost train, and even jousting shows. But Herbert didn't seem keen to go any farther. "So does that mean you're ready to sign? I have the contracts in my car ready for you to look them over, and we could arrange for our lawyers to meet up in the evening." "No, just slow down," I said again, raising my hands. I'm not going to be able to get my lawyer involved at such short notice. Tomorrow maybe if I give him a call. Herbert groaned, and so I continued. I'm not wasting your time. I promise, I just want to do this properly. The old man frowned but nodded. Fine, tomorrow. Just as long as you're not messing around. I've had too many people mess me around over the past few years, pulling out at the last second. I finally asked a sensible question. Why do you think that is? He narrowed his eyes, as if beside himself that I would even ask a follow-up question. Why do I think that is? Because people are unreliable. Why do you think this place closed down in the first place? It had everything going for it. We had everything going for us. And then one person complains and, well, I'm sure you saw all that nonsense in the paper back in '97. In all honesty, I didn't. And I was confused to see that this place had shut down. I used to love it as a kid. Herbert perked up at this. Well, that's because Fun Kingdom was the greatest theme park in the country. And maybe it will be again with you at the helm. I assume you're wanting to keep it as a theme park. Of course. Good. That's good. But I was scared to ask, as it was nice to see Herbert temporarily in a good mood. But his temperament fluctuated with the weather. The gray clouds had returned, and we were nearing that time on a late winter's afternoon at which the scarce sunlight was doing nothing to light the way. The old man took out his torch and flickered it on. It gets so dark at this time of year, he said, and then he frowned at me. You were going to say something. You mentioned the park shut down because of some nonsense. What happened? Oh, some kids and adults went missing in town, and one woman had the nerve to put the blame on Fun Kingdom. She went to the police with her thoughts, and they did a lazy investigation that joined the dots and raised some flags about the correlation between missing persons and people who had visited Fun Kingdom on the day of their disappearance. But every damn person in this town visited Fun Kingdom on the regular. It propped up the entire economy. He sighed. Anyway, the chief of police was going to draw a line under the whole thing, but the fiasco was starting to draw the attention of the national press. So Michael Englandton, the owner of Fun Kingdom, decided it was best to close the gates until things calmed down. And things never did calm down. So he skipped town and started selling off his assets. He left me here to hold the bag. And that brings us to today. I've spent 4 years trying to sell this place, but buyers never want to close on the deal. That's why I'm hoping you're not going to mess me around, young man. You're good for the money, I presume, because at this point, I'll take just enough to get me out of this place and to keep me from bankruptcy for good measure. I'm good for the money, I said. For $50,000, I think anybody would be good for the money. I paused. So those missing people, they never found them. Not that I'm aware, but like I said, the chief of police drew a line under the nonsense. There was no evidence that they had gone missing on the Fun Kingdom property. Blaming us was a low blow. We handed out cheap tickets like candy most summers. The kids and adults alike snatched them up. They'd be coming in and out all day every day. We were an easy target for the case, I suppose, but... Well, anyway, that horridness is all over now. And the local area hasn't had any incidents since that strange summer. Probably some drug-addled lowlife killed a bunch of people, buried the bodies, and got arrested on some other charges. I widened my eyes. You, speak pretty frankly, Herbert. I'm old, Fred. I'm old and tired. I don't have time to waste. No, you've made that rather clear by this point, I thought to myself. But I kept my comments to myself, because I seemed to be making a bit of headway with the man. He had softened. He had answered my biggest question about why the park shut down, and I was convinced that there was nothing to worry about, given the police had ruled out foul play on the Fun Kingdom property. It would perhaps take a little bit of PR work to fix the brand's image and get people back through the gates, but I imagine that it could be doable, as long as no nut jobs came out of the woodwork to blame the park for those unexplained disappearances from 4 years ago. I'm not here to waste your time, Herbert, I promised. I'm still interested in the park. Sounds to me like that ugliness from 4 years ago was a whole load of nothing. The old man smiled. Too right. Now should we head out? I can give you a copy of the contracts to look over, and we'll get our lawyers into the office tomorrow. Sure, but do you mind letting me have a quick peek inside the inner castle first? I used to love it as a kid. Herbert looked unsure for a moment, but my smooth talking had worked, because the old man nodded, and uncharacteristically for him, he didn't chew my ear off for daring to want to actually inspect the property. A little bit of flattery and a slight white lie could get a man anywhere. I had learned that over the years. The man fished out his keys and took us over a drawbridge over an empty moat that used to be filled with water, but was now filled with smashed liquor bottles and even a rusting shopping trolley. He then unlocked the second set of gates, which took us into the inner castle. Walled on all sides by a faux castle that included gift shops and the ghost train ride and even a small cinema. Even with moss and vines climbing the walls and shooting through the pass below our feet, I still felt a sense of childlike wonder to be back in this favorite place of mine from my childhood. My eyes went up to the staggering heights of the Red Death roller coaster. At the far side of this gargantuan inner courtyard between the tall walls of the castle, and then went down to the sad sight of the many smaller rides that look rusted and forlorn. There would be some serious maintenance required to fix up these gems from my childhood. Not even the rosy hue of nostalgia could blind me to how much work needed to be done. I was fortunate, I realized, that Herbert was asking for such a sickeningly low price for Fun Kingdom. It would take a significant investment to get the park back up to scratch and ready to be opened. I wagered it would be at least a year before I could open the gates to the public. Herbert smiled as he clocked me scanning my surroundings and likely saw the cogs in my brain working. He likely saw in my eyes that I was in fact a serious buyer and that I had done everything but sign my name on the contract. He seemed to relax a little now, realizing that I wasn't like the other buyers. You liked this place when you were a kid, huh? He asked. Yeah, I came here with my dad all the time. I'm good. I'd much rather sell it to a local. As I said, I've had some idiots mess me around over the years. They take a look at the place and they just... Herbert stopped, as if catching himself before saying something that he ought not to say. Well, they must be put off by the weeds and the vines and the rust and such. It'll take a little bit of money to get it back into shape, but I'm sure you can do it, Fred. I see the love in your eyes. I didn't think much of how Herbert talked about these other prospective buyers who had dropped out at the last minute. And I certainly didn't think about the fact that they had seen this place in person too. These are all things that seem clear to me upon reflection. But I'm an older man now. I'm a wiser man. I have a little bit of that fear in me, just as Herbert had that day. I have that twitch, always scanning my surroundings for things lurking out of the corner of my vision, just as he had. For me, it all started that day. It all started as I passed the dark entrance to my favorite ride from my childhood, above which hung a wooden sign with the words, Ghost Train. There was movement from within, just a flicker of movement, a yellow shape in the black. It was almost imperceptible in the dim light of an overcast late afternoon as we neared dusk, and by the time Herbert had brightened the spot which drew my gaze, filling the shadowy entrance of the ghost train with his torchlight, the yellow had gone. Herbert was stammering more than ever, struggling to catch up to his breathing. We ought to leave now, Fred. It's getting dark. The sunlight will be gone in half an hour or so. I might not have thought much of that yellow blur, I might have chalked it up to my eyes playing tricks on me. It could have been the reflection of Herbert's torch glow catching something. It could have been any myriad of things. But I knew from the horrified look on the old man's face that it was something of which he was well aware. Something that he was hiding from me. Something that he had been hiding from me since the beginning. As I said, I was young and foolish, but not entirely stupid. "What was that, Herbert?" I asked. "Nothing," he said, motioning back towards the gates with his torch. "Come on, let's go home now." "Was somebody in there?" I pressed. "A squatter, perhaps. One of the vandals who had graffitied those dodgems. It's okay, Herbert, I just want you to be honest with me." "Are you a serious buyer, Fred?" "You know I am, and we've gone over this a dozen times, but if..." I had to choose my words carefully. Something wasn't right about that yellow shape, and if I were to get answers, I would need to tread carefully and not get on Herbert's bad side again. When I become the owner of this park, I'll need to know about trespassers who have been causing a nuisance for you over the past 4 years, won't I? I'll need police help to clear them out." Herbert seemed assuaged by this. "Right, of course. Well, we can discuss all of that back at my office." "So, was it a squatter?" Herbert didn't reply. He led me back to the gate, and I realized that I wasn't going to get a good answer out of him, and I was feeling quite cold all of a sudden. The wind hadn't really picked up, but some instinct of mine had. I had ignored all the stories that Herbert told of the park's past, and I had ignored the rundown nature of the property. But I couldn't ignore this. That yellow blur. The more that I thought on it, it hadn't looked right at all. It had been quick. Far too quick. It had to be a squatter, I told myself. And if Herbert had answered me, I would have believed that. I would have been persuaded. But his silence struck me with terror, and we made it back to the gate through which we had entered the inner castle. But Herbert was frozen at the padlock, with his keys in hand. "No," he said. No. "No what? What's wrong?" I came to a stop beside him and I looked down to see the man holding a second metal padlock beside the first. It was a padlock that hadn't been there when we had first arrived. Somebody had locked us in. "Is this a joke?" I asked. I wanted to ask whether it was the squatter or one of his friends, but I was scared to keep asking questions. I was scared because I knew that Herbert would crack soon and tell me what I already knew deep in my gut. It wasn't a squatter, and something was very wrong with this place. I should have left when I had the chance, like those other prospective buyers. Herbert frantically dialed a number on his bulky cell phone and tapped his foot as he waited for someone to pick up. "Alicia, yeah, it's me, I'm at the park. Yeah, with a buyer. Listen, Steven hasn't been over to the park today, has he?" He paused to let her answer and then swore under his breath. "No, I'm fine, I just..." He stopped to smile at me awkwardly, but it was too late to pretend. I was seeing through the whole charade now. "Just, head over here with the bolt cutters, will you? I think somebody's, playing a little prank on us. There's a fresh padlock on the gate. And just a cheap set of bolt cutters will cut through it. Ask Mikey at the store." "No, you don't understand, it's a fresh padlock, a brand new one. Somebody put it there, I don't have the keys for it." "I know," he screamed. And then he cleared his throat and he smiled at me again apologetically. "Sorry, Alicia, sorry. I'm not cross at you, I just..." "Good, thank you. Yeah, as soon as possible, please." Herbert hung up the phone and gulped, casting his torch over my shoulder at the darkening inner castle. Dusk had well and truly arrived, and nightfall would be soon upon us. "So Alicia's on her way to let us out?" I asked in a croak. "Yeah, with some bolt cutters. We'll be fine." He was trying to convince himself more than me, I realized, as his eyes weren't meeting mine. He was casting the torch through the gate at the drawbridge on the other side, trying to search for anyone who might be out there. How long will she be? I asked. Oh, 20 minutes maybe, if she goes to Mikey for a set of bolt cutters first. The office is only a few minutes away. We waited 20 long minutes, until night had come and Herbert's torch was the only light that we had. But Alicia did not arrive, and Fun Kingdom was starting to lose its nostalgic aura. It was starting to become a different place, which I did not recognize in the slightest. I was becoming more like Herbert by the second, scanning those dark crevices just outside the reach of the torch glow, and twitching nervously as I told myself that I was imagining shapes moving in those shadowy unlit patches of the inner castle. Herbert rang Alicia after another 10 minutes, but the call went to voicemail, so he rang the office instead. Hey Steven, there you are. Where's Alicia? A long pause and his wide eyes said it all. She's not here. Right. So she got the bolt cutters from Mikey, but are you sure she said that she was coming here? Maybe she had an errand to run first. And then he was shouting again. Yes, Steven. I know I said it was an emergency, but Alicia's not always the sharpest tool now, is she? Look, you need to get over here. Yeah, now. Well, I don't know what to tell you, Steven, but she isn't here. Can't your wife go get your boy instead? This is an emergency, Steven. What? Don't you? Fine. We'll fetch the police then. Just anybody, or I'll call them myself if I have to. But my battery's getting low and you're right next door to the sheriff's office, so... He breathed a sigh of relief. Thank you, Steven. Yeah, get the chief over here now. Herbert hung up and pocketed the phone, and then he cast his torch around the unlit courtyard of the inner castle again, breathing a second sigh of relief as his glow caught no shapes moving about in the darkness. Good, that's good. Now we just need to wait for the chief of police to get here. What happened to Alicia? I asked. I don't know. Herbert snapped at me, and then he regained his composure. Sorry. I'm sorry, Fred. I was starting to lose my patience with the man. I mean, surely this gate isn't the only way out. We can't be walled and gated in. Well, we are. I guess you'll need to get this place up to code when you take over. And when I take over, I murmured. Sure. There was no chance that that was going to happen anymore. Some use had locked us into the inner castle, and now Alicia wasn't picking up her phone, despite having told Steven that she was heading here. So my mind was racing with possibilities. Horrible, horrible possibilities. What was the yellow shape that I had seen in the darkness? Tell me the truth, Herbert, I said. I think I deserve that, don't you? You're not telling me what we saw on the entrance to the ghost train. Herbert surprised me. He didn't shrug off my question this time, or at least he didn't shrug it off in quite the same way. It's best you don't know, he admitted defeatedly, giving up once again on his dream of convincing a prospective buyer to sign the contract for Fun Kingdom. All you need to know is that we're not safe here, and we should be hoping that Chief Jameson is already on his way over here, because we're running out of time. I frowned. Running out of time? Look, you're afraid of these squatters, and I'm afraid of them too now. So let's put our heads together. Let's think. There must be some other exit. There isn't. I don't mean an official way out, not a fire exit or something. Just come on, we could go into the castle walls and shimmy down into the moat from one of the windows or something. I laughed. Of course, then we would be stuck in a moat. Well, there is a drainage tunnel that cuts back out to a nearby road. Herbert frowned. But that sounds dangerous. And you just said that staying here was dangerous. So which would be worse? Waiting for the chief or trying to make our own way out? The old man was getting quite flustered now, and looking around as if something might be in the shadows. Yeah, all right, let's head inside. Just stick close to me in the light. And be careful. I nodded and led the way to the door to the gift shop. and into the castle we went. Once he had cast his light around at the aisles and we had seen no squatters were in there, the old man seemed a little more at ease. I certainly felt better inside. With castle walls to protect us, what fears should we really have? I was shocked, of course, that there were no fire exits or doors that let us out other than the main gates. I made a mental note that it would be one of the first things that I would fix, and then I reminded myself to wake up, and that I couldn't possibly be moronic enough to invest in such a dangerous place. Hopefully Alicia was okay, and hopefully kids were just pranking us. But hope didn't settle me. I knew the truth. I knew something was not right with Fun Kingdom, and with the setting of the sun, I saw that it was not the place that I had come to love in my childhood. I understood why Herbert had been so keen to hurry me out before the antics began. Squatters, I told myself again as we worked for the gift shop, lit by Herbert's torch. It's only squatters, and this is just an old man who's had his fill of delinquents terrorizing him over the years. And hey, I didn't blame him. But Alicia would be found, the squatters would be arrested, and all of this would be swept under the rug. And maybe once I had calmed myself down, I would even convince myself that this was a good investment after all. But that yellow shape in the dark, I couldn't stop thinking about that yellow shape. The windows at the far side of the gift shop overlooked the moat, and as the man scrubbed away some of the muck and filth from the old glass pane, he started to nod, entertaining my idea. It's not much of a drop," he said, starting to open the window. But now I was having second thoughts. Hey, maybe this is a dumb idea. The chief will probably be here in a minute. Besides, we can't exactly jump straight down without breaking our legs or something. We need to fashion a rope, I suppose. Herbert nodded in agreement, so we began to look around the gift shop but found nothing suitable. And then we wandered out into the castle corridor, and the moment that we left the gift shop behind us, there came the sound of a door slamming. It reverberated around the walls of the inner castle building, which looped in a square around the courtyard, and sounded to come from both the left and the right. It was impossible to know from which way the door slammed, and it was impossible to know from which way the footsteps were coming. Loud clunking, grinding footsteps. Hardly footsteps at all. Herbert gasped and grabbed my arm. "We need to hide, now." "Is this person really that dangerous?" I asked. "Oh, there's more than one." "All right, well, the chief of police will sort them out. We need more than a small-town cop. We need an armed military unit." I frowned. "For squatters?" "Oh, they're not squatters." Herbert turned off the torch and dragged me into one of the rooms and shut the door behind us. It seemed to be a security office with a dusty monitor on its desk and a forgotten computer beneath. And as he hurried us underneath, knocking over the old PC in the process, I heard those clunking footsteps approaching. There was such a strangely heavy thump and thunk to them, but they were footsteps. I had no idea how else to describe them. They just weren't shoes. They weren't bare feet slapping against stone tiles either. What were they? The footsteps stopped in the corridor outside the security office, and the two of us waited under that desk, holding our breaths. We waited for the clunking of feet to start again, but they didn't. There was silence in the inner castle, outside our pitch-black security office, but it was a weighty silence. It was one that I didn't trust. That person was out there, not a squatter, a person with heavy, impossible feet. I wanted us to wait until the sun came up. The chief of police wasn't coming for us, that much was clear. There were no sirens outside. There were no voices from the cavalry come to cut us free from the gate padlocked to keep us inside. There was Herbert and there was me, and there was someone outside the door. I wanted to explain this to the old man, but he didn't seem to understand. He chose to hope blindly that the terror had passed. After a few minutes of sitting in unsufferable silence, the man crawled out from his hiding hole and turned on the torch. I didn't even dare whisper for him to get back down, because the slightest sound would have given us away. I was sure that even the shuffle of him clambering up and the click of his torch turning on would have given us away. The person was still out there. That was what I wanted to tell him. He was too desperate to see that. Too desperate for us to find that rope, which we would scale the castle walls and escape to freedom through a drainage tunnel. Herbert abandoned caution and threw open the door to the security office. There was a moment's pause in which I wondered whether I had blown the whole ordeal out of proportion, and then came a metal limb and a yellow frilly sleeve, reaching into the room and seizing the old man by the neck. I put a hand to my mouth as Herbert screamed, and watched his metal fingers closed around his neck and drain the life from his eyes. And then came a resounding snap as the bone was broken and the old man's scream was extinguished. His limp body was then dropped to the ground. Tears filled my eyes as I kept my hand against my mouth, muffling any sound that might try to slip out, and the metal arm and its yellow sleeve retracted, and the sound of receding footsteps finally filled the air. I waited until the metal thing sounded distant enough, and then I made my exit. I scooped Herbert's fallen torch from the ground and went to the open door to the security office, and I peered out into the unlit corridor, casting the light both ways. My chest loosened a little as the glow caught nothing, so I made my way back to the gift shop. I was about ready to give up on our plan to escape. I was about ready to go back into the courtyard and try my best to scale that wrought iron gate, as impossible as that would have been. There was a slight gap between its top and the stone castle wall, so I told myself that that could have given me a way out, and maybe it could have. But I didn't make it a single step into the courtyard. In the open doorway between the gift shop and the outside world was a young woman in a yellow sundress, only she wasn't a woman at all, and I realized that I had recognized her from my youth. I recognized her from the ghost train ride. She was the animatronic at the end of the circuit, who stuck out arms and pleaded with the riders for salvation, pleaded to be freed from her ghost train prison. It seemed she had finally received her wish. I screamed and dashed across the gift shop, cutting through the aisles towards the windows on the far side, torch glow bouncing as my arms whirred like pistons. I saw in the reflection of the glass pane that the woman was on all fours, limbs slamming into these stone tiles behind me, and she knocked over a shelving unit atop her, buying me a moment more time to escape as she tried to shake off the falling gift shop items and regain her footing. I went to the castle window that Herbert had opened and glanced behind me to see the animatronic woman approaching on all fours, like a well-garbed animal, and screeched in terror as I hoisted myself over the bottom of the window frame. I gripped both hands around the stonework as sliding my body down, and there I hung over the edge, looking down at the moat about 15 feet below. There was no time to find a rope or a ladder or some way of getting down safely. I was thinking about how to drop without twisting an ankle, but there was no time to think either. That robot woman, whose paint had rusted over the years to leave behind only a metallic dome, opened her jaws wide and brought those metal gnashers down on my hands. She cut right through the bone and down to the other side, severing my fingers. I fell screaming into the moat, and I landed on my ankle painfully. Rolling over onto it and then falling to my side. My entire body was throbbing in excruciating agony, and even then, only adrenaline kept me from fully appreciating the level of pain which truly riddled my entire body. I had to survive. The thing in the yellow dress was above me, looking down at my mangled form at the bottom of the drained moat, and likely licking its metallic lips in hunger, wanting more of me than just fleshy digits. With a mangled hand and left ankle and a torch gripped loosely in my right hand, I hobbled my way around the moat, and I found the grate to the sewage drain. I felt a surge of relief that the grate was not bolted to the wall. It swung open with a light pull, but then came the smash of glass and the thunk of something large and metal landing in the moat, just around the corner from view. I realized that the torch would only draw it to me, so I dropped it at the entrance to the tunnel, and I made my way into the pitch black, pursued by clunking footsteps. It was 100 yards to the street. The street lamps marked the hole at the end, where the tunnel went out into a river, and a grassy embankment would take me up to the road. Just 100 yards, no distance at all. But tiptoeing through the dark with the clunks of an approaching beast scouring the black for me made those 100 yards feel more like 1,000. I clung to the walls, I crawled on the floor, I zigged and zagged and held my breath, and I used every tool at my disposal to remain hidden as the metal creature got right at my heels. And then I made it. I was out in the river. I looked back to see a blank metal face staring at me from the dark of the tunnel, and then they slipped back into it. I never contacted the owners of Fun Kingdom again. I never contacted the police. I never went back to the town. I ran and never looked back. Prison? What prison? That's what most people around here would say if you asked them about the Ravens Bend Correctional Center. 2 decades ago, on the other hand, it seemed like nobody would shut up about it. From the PTA to the Chamber of Commerce, everyone was arguing about the jobs that it might bring and the supposed danger to our community. Not that I paid much attention back then. I was just a teenager. I had no way of knowing that in just a few years, I would be working at the place. Groundskeeper was my official job title, but in reality, all I did was cut grass and shovel snow. The pay was good for part-time work, and as a recent college dropout, it was the best that I was likely going to find. I never interacted with the prisoners, and only rarely with the staff. I would show up for work at 6, make my way to the equipment shed, and mow the enormous yard between the fences. And the work was hot and monotonous, but with a good sun hat, a mask to filter the pollen, and some noise-canceling headphones, it was easy to just zone out. Almost 3 years went by like that, numb on autopilot, surviving rather than living. And then one foggy morning in November, I arrived at Ravens Bend and found that its gates were closed. Several correctional officers dressed in rubber ponchos were gesturing with flashlights, and I could hear the rumbling of buses in the facility parking lot beyond. Something was wrong. My boss, Brian Hartford, approached and held out a hand. He had never been an easy man to read, but that day his face was a stone mask. My services were no longer needed, he explained. Ravens Bend Correctional Center was closing down indefinitely. I would be mailed a final check along with 3 months' salary as compensation. At the time, I was too shocked to wonder whether my employers were buying my silence. The rumors flew for weeks afterwards. Some people claimed that there had been a disease outbreak. Others blamed asbestos in the walls or financial mismanagement. But the uncomfortable truth was that nobody knew for sure. The big shots at Ravens Bend were all from out of state, and the locals weren't talking. Some houses went up for sale, some agencies vowed to investigate. But it wasn't long before a drunk driving death at a local prom had pushed the story out of the news entirely. The facility was never demolished. I drove by it every day on the way to my new job, but after a few months, I quit looking out the window. Little by little, the Ravens Bend Correctional Center had faded from public memory. Even I, who had worked there for years, might never have thought about the place again, if it hadn't been for a woman named Chelsea Ann Stowell. I got a bad feeling from the moment that I heard the doorbell ring. Stylishly dressed young women like the one outside were a rare thing in my neighborhood, especially after dark. I opened the door just to crack and asked what she had wanted. With a too bright grin, the young woman asked if she was speaking to a former employee of Ravens Bend Correctional Center. I told her that she was, but I didn't budge. I had no intention of removing the door chain, not until I figured out who this stranger was and what she was after. As though sensing my suspicion, the young woman introduced herself as Chelsea Stowell. Her husband Mark had died while incarcerated at Ravens Bend, and now she was searching for more information about the place. The longer I looked at her smile, the more the tragedy underneath seemed to shine through. She must have had the same conversation dozens of times, and from the desperate look in her eyes, she had been turned down more often than not. I hoped she could hear the sympathy in my voice when I told her that, unfortunately, I was only a groundskeeper at Ravens Bend. I hardly ever went inside the facility, and I rarely interacted with the prisoners. Chelsea shook her head. She didn't care about any of that. She said only one thing that mattered. Did I still have my keys? I was surprised to remember that I did. After I had driven back home that bizarre morning, I had shoved them into a desk drawer without a second chance. Chelsea saw my nod before I could hide it. Her eyes lit up and she asked if she could step inside. She had an offer for me, she said, but it was something that had to be discussed in private. I should have known then what I was getting myself into. I looked around my street, deserted except for a few teenagers drinking on the hood of a broken-down truck. A couple houses over, I could hear old man Danforth screaming at one of his dogs. I didn't have any proof, but I suspected that he raised them for fighting. The sweat from my shift at the local pizza place was still damp on my back, and this was all my life had amounted to, probably all that it would ever be. What did I really have to lose by listening to Chelsea's story? I unchained the door and I gestured to the couch. Chelsea cleaned off a corner of it with a wet wipe and sat down. The uncomfortable silence deepened, and the makeup, the high-end clothes, the fake cheerfulness. It had all been a ploy to make it this far, but now that she finally had, she seemed unsure what to say. I thought that I was being helpful when I had asked what her husband had been in for. A fraud, embezzlement. Chelsea blushed, angry that I had made her say it. But that had nothing to do with the sort of man that Mark was. He was funny, considerate, and he loved his family. But after the trial, it was like the word criminal had been branded into his forehead. He died in that place, you know, without ever having a chance to clear his name, to see who he could have become. I told her that I was sorry and that I meant it, but I didn't see how I could help. I want to stand where he stood, in the place where he... Chelsea trailed off. She wiped her nose with a handkerchief. There were already tears forming in the corners of her eyes. As gently as I could, I explained that what she was proposing was a serious crime. Besides, there was no telling what security measures had been set up around Ravens Bend during the past years, or how much the structure had deteriorated. It's not breaking and entering if you've got the keys, Chelsea retorted. And you know as well as I do that nobody's watching the place. I shook my head. What she was proposing was insane. $70,000, Chelsea whispered. That's how much I'll pay you to get me into Ravens Bend. I began to say no for a second time, but then I hesitated. That was life-changing money. It was a down payment on a car, a house, a chance to finally get out of this shoddy little town that had let me down so often. I was about to ask Chelsea where she had gotten such a sum, but she beat me to it. That's all that I have left of Mark's dirty money. As crazy as it sounds, I want to get rid of it, to start over clean. And to do that, I have to say goodbye. I asked Chelsea once again if she was sure about this. A smile crept across her face beneath the tears. She knew that she had won. After she left, I did a little digging of my own. I discovered that Mark Stowell had been a real estate developer who had made a fortune cutting corners and making impossible promises, and barely any of it was recovered after his arrest. I also learned that Mark hadn't been the only one to die at Ravens Bend Correctional Center. 3 inmates had been stabbed to death during a gang riot the year after the place had opened, and another was found hanging in the laundry room under mysterious circumstances. There was a guard as well, Officer Thaddeus Williams, who was felled by an aneurysm while on duty. Curiously enough, Officer Williams' death had come just 3 days before the complex was closed down. None of it seemed particularly out of the ordinary. In fact, out of all the deaths at Ravens Bend, Chelsea's husband's was the only one that stood out, specifically because of the lack of details. Only 2 brief articles had been written about his passing, and neither mentioned how he had died. One was accompanied by a black and white photo of the grieving widow, which proved at least that Chelsea was who she said she was. And when we met that Sunday to make our preparations, I caught myself watching Chelsea out of the corner of my eye. I began to understand what Mark must have seen in her. There was something endearing about her hard-edged features, about the way her eyes seemed to narrow when she was really focused on something. The gear that she had brought, however, left it clear that she was no trophy wife. Gloves, masks, rope, bolt cutters, and crowbars. The loadout that she had brought made it feel like we were breaking into the Louvre, rather than some vacant Midwestern prison that no one cared about. The amount of planning she had put into the whole thing gave me confidence, but the cold metal of the key ring in my hand took it away. I couldn't stop thinking about that bizarre morning, when I, and presumably every other employee of Ravens Bend, had been informed that we were out of a job. In spite of the security risk, we had all been sent home with our keys, badges, and work uniforms, and no one working inside had ever come forward about why the place had closed down. What had really happened behind those double-layered steel gates? The more I pondered those questions, the more troubled I felt, and by the time that Chelsea arrived to pick me up, my nerves were a mess. She, on the other hand, was cold as ice. The look in her eyes reminded me of an Olympic athlete who had spent years training for a single moment and was now coolly certain of success. The key ring jangled in my pocket like an omen as I climbed into her passenger seat, and we didn't talk. So late at night, the small town roads were nearly deserted. Only once did I spot a dark, gaunt shape, a deer maybe, slinking back into the undergrowth. There was nothing but fields and forest around the Ravens Bend complex, so we parked at the nearest possible place, a shuttered general store a few miles away. After driving around back to hide our vehicles from the road, Chelsea killed the engine, slung her pack over her shoulder, and trampled off through the long grass. She didn't look back to see if I was following. We skirted the edge of the woods, ready to take cover if any headlights approached, but none did. Chelsea set such a rapid pace that I had to practically jog to keep up with her, stumbling in gopher holes and over the branches of fallen trees. Even so, almost an hour passed before the massive black hulk of the Ravens Bend Correctional Center rose up before us. From Chelsea's grimace and the way that she kept checking her digital watch, I could tell that she was thinking the same thing that I was. we were way behind schedule. It was a strange feeling being back here after all these years. And during my absence, the grass had grown waist high all the way up to the complex doors. But the place was otherwise free of the decay that I had expected. It reminded me uncomfortably of a sealed tomb. A metallic shriek made me jump. Chelsea was hacking through the fence with the bolt cutters that she had brought. She hadn't bothered to check whether it was electrified or equipped with an alarm, which gave rise to another uncomfortable thought. Had Chelsea known? Had she been here before? When she had first proposed this insane idea, I had been impressed by her preparation, by her blueprints and all of her itemized equipment. But now it was starting to scare me a little bit. And Chelsea held open the cut in the mesh wire and gestured for me to pass through. As we crossed the wide open fields between the fences, I couldn't help but glance up at the sniper towers on each corner. In my head, I knew they were empty, so why did I feel such a presence here? I considered mentioning it to Chelsea, but I changed my mind at the last minute. I didn't want her to think that I was losing my mind. Once we had reached the facility doors, I finally understood why Chelsea had needed my keys. Even with the heaviest equipment, breaking through the reinforced steel would have been nearly impossible, and closing the entrance again would have been impossible afterwards. I flipped through keys until I found the right pair, slipped them into place and stepped back. I took a deep breath. I didn't want to unbolt those locks, I realized. I didn't want to see what was on the other side. I wanted whatever was inside of Raven's Bend to stay in there, unseen for all time. And Chelsea looked at me expectantly. It was so quiet that I could hear insects whirring in the tall grass surrounding us. The pine trees sighed in the wind. Before I could stop her, Chelsea reached out and opened both locks with a fateful click. The thick metal door swung open, revealing a wide, unlit corridor that, after all these years, somehow felt unfamiliar. Just as with the exterior of the structure, all signs of deterioration were eerily absent. There was no dust, no rat droppings or cobwebs. It was like the place had just been holding its breath, waiting for us. As we crossed the threshold, I noticed a series of holes in the floors and walls. I remembered the tour that Mr. Hartford had given me the first day, how he had explained that in the event of a lockdown, wrist-thick bars would emerge to pin the doors in place. I warned Chelsea that if that happened now, I had no idea whether my keys would still be able to get us out. Instead of responding, she extracted a headlamp from her backpack and handed me another. With a reluctant look back at the clear night sky outside, I followed her into the darkness. With its white-tiled floors and wide corridors, Raven's Bend looked more like a high school than a prison, at least until we got to the first cell block. The riot control gates had been left standing open, as had most of the cells. All of the furniture was still in place. I spotted some balls of crumpled paper on the floor, and a blue plastic lunch tray with a single long evaporated cup of coffee in one corner. The trash bags were still half full. Where had everyone gone in such a hurry? Chelsea paused several times to study the blueprints that she had brought, but for the most part, our route through the facility was straightforward. Neither of us spoke. We barely knew each other, and even the squeak of our footsteps on the yellowed, tiled floor felt too loud. I suppose that Chelsea's thoughts were with her husband, reliving the times that she had visited him here, imagining what life must have been like behind bars. I mean, that's why we were here, wasn't it? To give her some kind of closure, She would spend a while in a cell, say her goodbyes, and then pass along to me the last of his dirty money. I mean, sure, it seemed like an extreme way of handling grief, but who was I to judge? And we continued on in silence until the lights overhead came on. Chelsea looked over her shoulder at me. Terror sparkled in her eyes. Although whether it was a fear of being caught or of something far worse, I couldn't have said. The way she looked at me for help made me irrationally angry. She was the one who had gotten us into this mess. She was the one who should have known that this was going to happen. I cringed, expecting police, barking dogs, or blaring alarms, but none came. It was as though somebody else had just flicked on a switch. I had an insane urge to whisper a hello into the empty cell block, even if only to prove that all of this was really happening. I really was here, in the closed-down prison where I used to work, helping a woman who I had met come to terms with her husband's death. And now I had a reason to believe that we weren't alone. We crouched down behind a grim metal table in the center of the common area. I had figured that from there it would be more difficult to spot us from the hallway. But what about the cells up above? The place was designed to be a panopticon, to be observable from all sides. Even though I knew no one could be up there, my gaze kept drifting up, as though I might spot some awful face grinning down at us from over a railing. Minutes passed. There was still no movement. I wanted to make a run for it. Chelsea pointed urgently toward the next corridor. "We can't turn back now," she pleaded. "We're almost there, and if we turn back early, there will be no payment." And greed was the only reason that I was able to convince myself that maybe, just maybe, what we were seeing was a fluke in the electrical system. Quickly and silently, we advanced toward the next cell block, the one where Mark had supposedly been incarcerated. We had passed by several rooms whose purposes I couldn't discern along the way, but the enormous dryers and clothing hampers beyond the upcoming doors made it clear. We were passing by the prison laundry. There were half-folded stacks of towels, enormous bottles of detergent, and a pair of dangling, kicking feet. I looked away, telling myself that I couldn't have seen what I thought I had. There wasn't a black silhouette hanging by its neck from the crossbeam. It hadn't opened a pair of pale, bloodshot eyes and glared at me. I hadn't heard the gurgling of its swollen purple tongue squirming around in its mouth as it glared at me. All of that was impossible. I must have just had what was it called? A stress-induced hallucination. And Chelsea's attitude proved it. She was continuing straight ahead as though nothing was wrong. I, on the other hand, couldn't help but stare over my shoulder at the wide-open laundry room door. Part of me longed to look again, and part of me didn't dare. The cell block ahead was identical to the one that we had just left behind, a common area ringed by 3 floors of cells. "Mark's is on the 2nd floor, 3rd from the right," Chelsea was telling me. "Now if you'll just..." A sudden bang cut off Chelsea's instructions. Her face went pale. "Oh my God, hide!" And Chelsea scrambled into the nearest open cell and squeezed beneath one of the bunk beds. Reluctantly, I did the same. I held my breath and tried not to think about what would happen if the door to our hiding spot suddenly slammed closed. I recognized the sound coming toward us from a dozen prison movies. It was a nightstick bashing against metal. Was someone trying to scare us? Or was the noise entirely unrelated? In an angry whisper, I told Chelsea that she needed to tell me everything she knew, now. If she didn't, I threatened that I would step outside and give myself up to whoever was coming. "If you do that," she answered coldly, "we're both dead." Chelsea had called my bluff, and now that the loud, brutal clanging was closer, I was no longer at all sure that I could make myself go through with it. Peeking out from beneath the bed, I caught sight of a broad-chested young man in uniform who wore his hair shaven to the skin beneath his guard cap. He lurched into a cell across from ours, and he began attacking everything in sight, from the bunk beds to the stainless steel toilet. Anyone else would have run out of steam after just a few minutes, but the guard just kept on going long after his tendons should have been torn and his muscles turned to jelly. Still unsatisfied, he reared back and bashed his face into the unbreakable glass. I bit down a stream of blood as splattered out from the point of impact, again and again until the guard's face was a little more than a mangled, red raw skull. His teeth were broken, one eye dangled loosely from its socket, but in the brief moment before his features were destroyed, I had recognized him. Officer Thaddeus Williams, the guard who had collapsed from an aneurysm while on duty. He was somehow horribly here. And he was angry. Angrier than I had thought it was possible to be. The deadly, self-inflicted damage hadn't slowed him down a bit. He continued his rampage in the common area, and at any moment he might look toward the cell where Chelsea and I were hiding. A part of me longed to make a run for it, and part of me knew that that was the most dangerous thing that I could do. I could already imagine those legs stretching hideously as Officer Williams chased after me. Having run out of things to smash in the common area, the thing that had been Thaddeus Williams slunk back towards the corridor that he had come from, hammering his baton against anything within reach. It was only after the clatter of his rage had died out completely that I dared to speak. And my first words to Chelsea were, "What the hell was that?" And they come back, she murmured, as though trying to convince herself as much as me. And the ones who die here, they come back. That's why this place closed down in the first place. There was this officer, a guy named Williams. Mark and all the others were terrified of him. Mark said that he did the job for the pleasure of it, just to hurt people. The higher-ups didn't like to talk about it, but Williams actually died while attacking another inmate, in that cell right across from us. Imagine dying like that, with all that hate in your veins. Imagine what it might turn you into. The whole thing would have sounded insane if I hadn't seen it with my own eyes. Now our break-in finally made sense. Chelsea hadn't just come here to pay respect to her husband's memory. She was actually hoping to meet him. We both looked nervously toward the same cell on the second floor, the third one from the right. It stood open like it was inviting us in. My voice cracked like a scared child's as I told Chelsea that I understood if she wanted some time alone with him. She shook her head. We've come this far together." Chelsea smiled and squeezed my shoulder, and then she looked nervously toward the long corridor where Officer Williams had gone. "And besides, I don't think it's a good idea to get us separated. We don't know what else might be in here with us." And the echo of our footsteps on the metal stairs sounded as loud as a ringing bell. If Officer Williams or anything else was nearby, it had surely hurt our progress. At last, we came to a halt in front of Mark Stowell's cell. It was empty, apart from a single brown-haired figure in a prison jumpsuit. I almost wished that he had been floating in the air, that his fingers ended in monstrous black claws, or that his flesh had been rotted down to the bone. Somehow anything would have been better than just that slim, solitary figure, staring emptily at a bare concrete wall. And when we reached the doorway, it turned toward us. Mark Stowell was in his late 40s and handsome in a craggy sort of way. I could see why so many people had trusted him. The sparkle in his hazel eyes and a sly grin were almost enough to make me forget that the man standing in front of me was undeniably dead. A look passed between Mark and Chelsea, one not just of love, but complicity. Some sort of signal had been given. And then everything seemed to happen at once. Chelsea shoved me into the cell and tried to slam the door shut behind me. but I blocked it with my foot. Mark, or the thing that had once been Mark, lunged at me, its mouth open wide. Its morgue, cold hands closed around my throat, its jaw distended like a constrictor snake's. As I kicked and screamed, I could feel my life force, my energy, my will to live, everything that made me, me, being pulled into the black pit of its mouth. I toppled over onto my back. The cell door bashed into my ribs again and again as Chelsea fought to slam it shut. Mark's awful, dangling jaw inched closer to my face. And then we heard it. The steady hammering of Officer Williams' nightstick, getting closer with each passing second. It was all the distraction that I needed. Mark let out an inhuman howl of rage and hunger as I wiggled out of his grip. Chelsea shrieked and tried to trap me with the door for a second time, but she was too late. I was already free. Out of the corner of my eye, I could see Mark bounding after me on all fours like some sort of horrible dog. "Hurry, baby," Chelsea hissed. "He's coming." I threw myself down the stairs, crashing into one railing after another. I sprinted madly down the first corridor that I came to, only to realize that I was going deeper into the facility. It was too late to turn back now, however. Chelsea and Mark were closing in, and Officer Williams' Revenant wasn't far behind. I skidded through another cell block. My breath came in ragged gasps and I was seeing spots. How long had it been since I had run so fast or so desperately? At last now I understood why Chelsea had wanted me to come with her. It wasn't just my keys and badge that she had wanted, it was me. She needed me to be some sort of sacrifice that would give life to her husband. For all I knew, she had been inside of Raven's Bend before. And for all I knew, this was what she had planned from the beginning. If I ever got out of this, maybe I would find that several other former Raven's Bend employees like myself had disappeared lately. Somewhere behind me I heard a violent crash, a struggle, and a sudden sharp scream. Officer Williams had caught up with Mark, and from the sound of the fight and Chelsea's scream, the results were brutal. I would never get a better chance to find a hiding spot. But where could I go? If the dead had truly walked these empty halls until dawn, what chance did I have of staying undetected? There was a wide open, tiled area to my left, the shower room. From the corridor I could see a changing area, 2 long walls of shower heads and a dozen toilet stalls. Apart from the slow, steady drip of water, there was no sign of movement in that labyrinthine space. It was perfect. I would be able to get out of the way of whatever was approaching without cutting off my own escape. If the pursuer got near, I thought, at least there was more than one way out. I pressed my back against a wall and fought to calm my heaving breaths. I was surprised to find that the tile was damp. If I squinted, I could see a thin stream of dark water flowing beneath the drainage grates. Had the room been in use lately, and if so, why? I looked nervously from the benches of the changing area to the unusually small stall doors, and then I eyed the faucets and shower heads. Where was that dripping noise coming from? The chaos from the corridor called my attention away from the mystery. Someone hurried past, gasping and limping, Chelsea, I suppose. The racket of slams and snarls behind her had faded out, replaced by a familiar, repetitive sound. Clanging. Mark must have thrown himself at Officer Williams to give Chelsea a chance to escape. In spite of what they had tried to do to me, I had to admit that they must have really loved each other. But it hadn't made any difference. Officer Williams' uncannily quick marching steps were closing in on Chelsea, and the next blow from the nightstick impacted with something very different from a metal bar. There is a crack and a squelch, like a melon breaking open, and then an awful tearing noise that I couldn't bring myself to describe. Chelsea never had a chance to scream. When it was over, Officer Williams resumed his marching steps, pausing only to unleash his rage on the gates and furniture. I was faced with a terrible choice. Raven's Bend was a rectangular structure, and unless I was mistaken, the shortest way to the exit was now straight ahead, the same path that Officer Williams had taken. My only other option was to risk backtracking past Chelsea's mangled remains, Mark's cell, and the thing hanging in the laundry room. For all I knew, I still might come face to face with Williams anyway, as he continued his eternal patrol. I took a deep breath and decided to press on. I peered around the corner of the tile wall to make sure that the coast was clear. And there they were, 3 figures in prison jumpsuits. One held a shiv, another a length of pipe. The third was armed with the jagged edge of a broken lunch tray. One of the headlines that I had read flashed through my mind. 3 killed in riot at Raven's Bend. While I had dithered and debated which way to go, they had been tiptoeing closer. And didn't even hear us coming. The one with the shiv chuckled, twirling the little blade between his fingers. Yeah, looks about ready to piss himself. The one with the bent pipe added. His jumpsuit was riddled with bleeding holes. The man holding the sliver of lunch tray made a hideous gurgling sound, and I realized that his throat had been roughly severed, probably with the same improvised weapon that he was holding. The falling droplets fell onto the shower room floor. That was the noise that I had been hearing. I took an unconscious step away from the bloody trio. And be still, the shiv man warned me. We can make this hurt a little, or we can make it hurt a lot. His jaw dropped low just as Mark's had. I could feel my energy drawn toward the black pit of his mouth as though pulled by an invisible tide. I ran. Hold him, the shiv man snarled. I vaulted over a changing room bench and took off, ignoring the curses and inhuman gurgling behind me. My lungs burned from the effort. 1 cell block and 1 left turn, I told myself that was all. If I could make it that far, I could slam the door on this nightmare forever. Slam the door. Wasn't that what Officer Williams had been bashing his nightstick against? The bars of the gated doors that separated the cell blocks. There was another one just up ahead. They had to have been left open during the evacuation or whatever it had been, but my old manager had warned me about those gates and how they locked automatically if closed. I slammed the gate shut as I went through it, and I was rewarded by the reverberation of my 3 pursuers crashing into its bars. The man with the bent pipe snapped his teeth at me like a rabid animal. His accomplice with the split throat started biting the bars. Shiv Man, however, simply reached through them. His joints dislocated sickeningly. Blood oozed like tears from the fractures in his skull as he pressed his head into the gap between the bars. His body was breaking, but he was pulling himself through. I had slowed them, but not for long. I barreled blindly onward. I crossed the final cell block and put 2 more gates between myself and the frenetic footsteps behind me. To my left was the way out into the exercise yard. To my right, the officer where I had signed my work contract at Raven's Bend all those years ago, which meant that the exit was dead ahead. Officer Williams walked out into the corridor in front of me. He didn't say a word, didn't seem to even notice the fluids oozing from his face onto the front of his uniform. He just slapped his nightstick casually against his thigh like a hungry kid waiting for the lunch bell. And then he charged. His long, scissoring steps would have shattered the legs of an ordinary adult, and I knew from the moment that I saw him closing in that I didn't have the strength left to dodge. His nightstick collided with my kneecap. I heard the stick snap before I felt the pain. The agony was blinding. I dropped to the floor, cradling my leg, and I saw William's polished boots continue past. It was clear where he was going, toward the three figures in jumpsuits that had just pulled their broken bodies through the final gate. I groaned, rolled onto my stomach, and crawled toward freedom. And behind me, the sounds of violence echoed through the empty prison like a cannibal concerto. While the restless spirits of Raven's Bend fought one another, I fumbled with the keys. I bit my own wrist to calm my shaking hands as I jammed them into the double lock and twisted. Cool night air rushed across my sweat-soaked skin. I tore the keys free, lunged outside, and locked the doors behind me. Out here, with the moss, the meadows, and the moonlight, it was almost possible to believe that everything that happened inside Raven's Bend was a bad dream. But the pain in my knee said otherwise. I half-hobbled, half-crawled back to the tree line, where I fashioned a crutch out of a downed tree branch. The sun was rising by the time that I made it back to the road. I told the trucker who had stopped for me that I had wandered off the trail while hiking and I had gotten hurt. "Uh-huh," he said, looking over his shoulder at the Ravens Bend access road a mile back. We didn't talk anymore after that. The doctors confirmed what I had already feared. My kneecap was broken. It would mean months off my feet, followed by an even longer period of recuperation. It would mean sinking even further into debt, as well as having far, far too much time to think. I thought about the people who had been incarcerated at Raven's Bend in the early days when the strangeness first began to manifest. I thought about what it must have been like to see and experience those horrors, only to be disbelieved by the prison staff. I thought about what it must have been like to wake up in one of those metal cots, to find dead men with makeshift weapons squeezing through the bars, or to be a night shift guard pursued down sleeping hallways by the clanging of William's nightstick. What must it have been like during those final days before the authorities finally admitted that the impossible was real? I never reported Chelsea missing. For all I knew, she's still in town in a way, and I haven't driven past Raven's Bend since. If anybody asks me about my time there, I'll join the chorus of my friends and neighbors. Prison? What prison? I forgot it was ever there. And maybe some places are better left forgotten. I've always wanted to be a homeowner. I grew up in this nice house with my mom, dad, and older brother. We had a yard with a swing and a sandbox and a big grill where my dad used to make hot dogs. And then the recession hit. We had to sell the house and get an apartment. It wasn't bad, but it was weird having to go from having my own room to sharing one with my brother. I decided that I would live the kind of life that allowed me to have a place like that of my own. I tried to get a good job, but something always killed the momentum. The housing crisis, the pandemic, and this endless parade of things that I couldn't control. Even if I handled my job well, I had to start over again and again. Cutbacks, layoffs, restructuring, whatever you call it. I got a remote job some years ago and decided to go for it. I found a cheap house on the top of Hilltop. Not the biggest place, but it was my own and I could work remotely. Hilltop is not a big city and it's not the most exciting area. But if you've ever been a homeowner, you have to make some concessions. It was a one-story building that had been empty for years. 4 rooms, a large bathroom, and a refurbished kitchen. A garage that wasn't connected to the main building. There was a storm cellar too. I'll be honest, my first thought was, I messed up. When I got there with all my furniture in boxes, I didn't know what to do. The floors were a mess, the bathroom didn't have warm water, I barely had any reception, and I couldn't get the Wi-Fi working. But what's done is done, and day by day, I made it a little better. New doors for the garage and new floors. Fixed the bathroom tiling and redid some of the plumbing. I hired some guys to trim the yard, plant some bushes, and add some stepstones out front. The place gradually transformed, even if there were some strange groans and creaks when it got windy. I was proud to call that place a home. I had my own yard, my wallpaper, and my furniture. Kitchen table, 2 chairs, a vintage leather couch. Not too shabby. I was happy with that place. I would work from about 9 in the morning to 6 in the evening with a 1.5 hour lunch. Sometimes I had to take client calls later in the day, and then I could compensate by sleeping in and starting later the day after. I do have a lot of technical illustrations for guidebooks and also act as a reviewing consultant. I get handed something that's been worked through a dozen times when they need someone with a nice title to put a final stamp of approval. It pays well, but if you don't pay attention, you can screw yourself out of a job. I had lived in Hilltop for about 1.5 years. It was summer not that long after 4th of July. You could still see remnants of red, white, and blue balloons downtown. It was closing in on the weekend, but I had gotten a bunch of last-minute things to chug through because of a scheduling error. They had accidentally written the wrong date, and something that I thought was due in August was in fact due in a couple of days. I had to pull a series of all-nighters. I was living on these cheap boxes of Chinese food that I would save up in the freezer, along with a big box of cheap energy drinks. Not my usual forte, but I was working 16 to 18 hours a day and barely looking up from my screen. I had a pillow next to my workstation for micro naps. I usually read a lot of my work on a tablet, but I had to sit uncomfortably in order to stay awake. Even then, I had a guy calling me once every 6 hours to get a status update. I had this default ringtone that had seared into my brain like a tattoo. I was on day 3 and I had had about 4 hours of sleep the night prior, and I was just over halfway done overall. It looked like I was going to meet my deadline in a couple of days, if only by a hair. At one point I got up to have my 3rd energy drink of the day, and I splashed some cold water on my face. My hands were shaking, but I was so into my work that I wasn't really paying attention. If I had, I would have looked out the window. I would have noticed the man walking up my driveway. Just as the sun began to set, there was a knock on my door. I nearly choked on my drink. I had only ever had delivery guys knock on my door, no visitors. I didn't know enough people in the area yet. Looking out the kitchen window, I could see that there was somebody standing at the front door. I hadn't put in a peephole yet, so I wasn't sure about letting him in. Walking up to the door, I called out, "Excuse me, who is it?" "Lars, I used to live here." "All right. Can I come in?" I looked around. The place wasn't a mess per se, but I wasn't ready for company. I had things to do. "Hey, sorry, I'm a bit busy at the moment. How about next weekend?" "Oh, I won't be long," he interrupted. "Please, it's serious." "Do you need help? Should I call someone?" "Look, I don't have much. Never mind." Seconds later, the lock clicked and the door swung open. The front door was one of the few things that I hadn't replaced yet, and apparently this man had an old key. Lars was a man in his early 60s. Long white hair, slim and tall build, a messy beard that could use a trim. The moment that he stepped in, he slammed the door shut and locked it. I was already taking a step back towards the bathroom, getting ready to call the cops. He held up a hand showing that he wasn't armed. "Oh, I need something from the bedroom," he said. "It'll take 5 seconds. 5 seconds and I'm out. Please." I was scrambling to find the right words. I got in the way, I yelled, I pointed, but I didn't know what else to do. I wasn't prepared. I could pull a knife on the guy, but was I ready to stab him? I didn't know, so I didn't do it. I just followed him, holding up my phone as a threat. He didn't seem to mind. He jogged into the bedroom, only to notice that I had put in a wardrobe that covered one of the walls. The thing was nailed to the floor and he wasn't about to move it anytime soon. He threw the doors open and crawled in, smacking the back of the wardrobe with his open fist. "Damn it," he called out. "A wardrobe? And they never put in wardrobes. Why now?" He got back out and looked me in the eye. He thought about what to say for a couple of seconds and then he spoke in a low voice. "I know this is weird. I know. But do you have an axe or some kind of power tool? I'm not helping you mess up my wall. It's a matter of life and death. Well, then we need to call the police. It's not that simple." As he raised his voice, we stopped and turned. There was another knock on the front door. Lars looked at me as if silently asking if I was expecting company. I shook my head. Someone knocked for a second time. I stepped back into the main hall. I could hear muffled voices coming from outside. "Sir, would you kindly open the door? It's an urgent matter." Lars looked at me with these wide eyes, shaking his head. "I can hear y'all walking around in there." The muffled voice continued. "Don't make me wait now." "What is this about?" I asked. "Oh, you got our buddy in there, right? Long hair, looks like shit." "Yeah?" Lars swore under his breath and bolted for the back door, the one that opened into my beautifully trimmed yard. He pulled the door open and sprinted for the woods. Some of the voices on the other side of the door stepped away to speak into some kind of radio, and seconds later I heard a barking dog. It didn't take them long to come around the back of the house. I saw a German shepherd bring Lars to the ground as two men with rifles zip-tied his hands behind his back. I've never heard that kind of pain scream before, but it was only a prelude. My heart was beating out of my chest, and the energy drinks weren't helping. "If you don't open this door in 6 seconds, it's coming down. You want me to start counting?" "I'm not a part of this," I said. "I'm not a part of any of this." "Well, then you'll be fine." "We'll all be fine. Nothing but sunshine and rainbows." I opened the door. There were 6 men outside, making them 8 in total with the 2 out back. 8 men and a German shepherd. The 2 up front were about Lars's age with trimmed white hair and beards. Military, maybe law enforcement. Both had rifles resting on their stomachs with their arms crossed. Nondescript black baseball caps, blue fatigues, and bulletproof vests. Handcuffs, stun guns, pepper spray, 2 sidearms. One on the hip and one across the chest. As they dragged Lars back into the house, kicking and screaming, the man at the door gave me a big smile. "Oh, thank you kindly," he said. "Name's Jerome, and this here's Marcus. Mind if we come in?" I didn't say anything, I just stepped aside. Even if I managed to call for help, I'd be dead in 5 seconds if I made any sudden moves. These people weren't messing around. Jerome walked right past me, but the second guy, Marcus, stopped and held out his hand. "Phone," he said. "Please." I handed it to him. He nodded, putting it in his breast pocket. "I got one of these too," he nodded. "Sorry about the inconvenience." One by one, a full squad of what looked like an armed militia crowded into my house. They closed and locked the front door as somebody bandaged Lars' leg. There was a big splotch of blood on the hallway carpet. It was enough that I could smell it, but it was quickly getting overpowered by sweat and gun oil. They had to keep an eye on me without diverting their attention from Lars, and they settled on sitting me down in the living room. I had been compliant enough that they didn't handcuff me, but they zip-tied my feet just so that I wouldn't get any ideas. That and one of the youngers of the group had his attention completely on me. They took one of my 2 chairs and strapped Lars to it. As they did, Jerome leaned back with a cigarette. Before he lit it, he looked over at me. "Do you mind?" I wanted to say yes, but the words caught in my throat. I ended up coughing, and Jerome nodded, putting the cigarette away. "Fair's fair. We're gonna have a chat with our buddy here and we'll be gone in no time. Sound good to you? Great. Yeah, that's great. Fantastic. He slapped his hands together as they tightened Lars' straps and pulled up my second kitchen chair. He turned it around and leaned on the backrest. He seemed comfortable with this, not a drop of sweat. And they asked him a couple of basic questions just to get him talking. They asked for his full name, date of birth, and where he was born. When they asked what year it was and what day and who's the president, that's when things got complicated. Lars didn't seem to know. Jerome didn't seem to like that, not one bit. You know why we ask those questions. It's to measure cognition and function. And if I'm to believe any shit that crawls out of your mouth, you better get that cognition and function tip-top, my friend. So I ask again, who's president? I haven't been keeping up, You don't know our commander-in-chief. I don't. You've been living under a rock or something. They laughed at that. Some of them laughed a little bit too hard. For a moment, Lars looked up and met my eyes across the room. There was something that he was trying to say, but I couldn't tell what. Maybe he was asking me not to get involved. Jerome shook his head and patted the German Shepherd. It wagged its tail so hard that it almost knocked over a lamp. 26 years and counting. We've had one hell of a time planning your welcome home party. And here you are, stepping out of the dark and back into the light. Like what's it called? Lazarus, Marcus added. Like Lazarus of Bethany. Like Lazarus of goddamn Bethany. Jerome smacked his knee as he punctuated each word, and then he pointed at me with his full hand. You read your Bible, sir. I don't have one. Don't get more American than that, he laughed. True blue, an honest sinner. Pay attention, Lazarus. You're gonna need a role model. And then he closed his fist, leaned back, and crushed Lars's nose in a strike so violent that it knocked the chair over. The dog started barking but was held back by his handler as the zip tie stopped me from jumping out of my seat. The man keeping an eye on me held up a hand, silently asking me to settle down. They got him back and straightened him out. Lars gasped for air, wheezing through a broken nose. There was already swelling on his face, making one eye halfway closed. Word association time, Jerome said. Car. What? Jerome slapped him across the face. It wasn't hard, but anything stings with a broken nose. Lars flinched and closed his eyes. Jerome tried again. Car. Loan. Home. House. Box. Lars hesitated. Jerome raised his hand and grinned, but didn't strike a second time. He turned to the others as if acknowledging that he was onto something. Box, he repeated. Your turn, lassie boy. Distant. And now you're lying. That's not how people do this. You see, I said one-syllable words. It's in the nature of people to match that, so when you don't, you know that you're considering your words. You're lying. Now, if you had said gone, that'd be different. But you said distant. That's not what it is it? He leaned a little closer, teasing the stun gun on his belt. He continued, quieter, almost whispering. It's not distant at all, is it? The line of questioning continued. A lot of them implied that Lars had been somewhere far away for a prolonged period of time. They asked him things like the name of the port of entry and the name of his sponsor. Lars tried his best to answer, but sometimes his words would get a bit muddled up because of the blood. Jerome could explode into violence at the drop of a hat, and he did. They had been here for about half an hour when he got into something that I remember in detail. They had wiped Lars's nose with a paper towel, and two of the guys had started walking around the house looking for something. I figured it was whatever was in the bedroom, but I didn't want to say anything. You know what's funny? Jerome asked. I thought you'd stop aging by now. I thought you'd be a spring chicken once you got back. It don't work like that. I can tell. You look like shit. Occupational hazard. Oh, you got jokes, Jerome smiled. Man's got jokes. You want to hear one of mine? Lars didn't answer. He just looked down and shook his head. A gun sits down at a bar and asks the bartender who the pretty girl at table 1 is. The bartender says, I don't know. And then the gun asks who the handsome guy at table 2 is. The bartender says, I don't know. And then the gun asks who the cute old lady sitting at table 3 is. Again, the bartender says, I don't know. Jerome removes his pistol from its holster and undoes the safety. He continues the story looking down at his gun. And then the bartender asks, why do you want to know? Why are you asking about all these people? And you know what the gun says? He slowly lifts the pistol and rests it in the flat space of Lars's forehead. I just want to bang, man. For a moment, I think he's gonna pull the trigger. Not from his face, but the face of the others. People behind Lars step away. One of the guys shields his face, expecting blood. Jerome doesn't give away anything, but I can tell that they're waiting for something to happen. Lars looks at me one more time as if asking me a silent question. I don't know if he's begging me to speak or to shut the hell up. I can't tell, but I don't want a man dying in my house. The bedroom, I say, my mouth dry like powder. He was looking for something in the bedroom. Jerome tilted his head up, pulling his gun back. In the wall behind the wardrobe. He asked if I had an axe. I continue. No shit. I shook my head. Jerome put away his gun and got out of his chair, patting Lars on the head like an obedient dog. Oh, look at that, Jerome exclaimed. Look at that. Lazarus won't have to come back twice after all. He got his own Lord and Savior right here with zip-tied feet. Ain't that something? Jerome's right-hand man Marcus pulled out a combat knife and hurried into the bedroom. Within seconds, I could hear pounding on the wall. I tried to meet Lars's eyes, but he didn't move. I got the impression that maybe I chose wrong. As the pounding continued, I got a couple more snippets of context. Lars had been gone for 26 years, and these people knew each other at some point. Lars would mention names of friends that they had in common and used to know, some of whom who had passed. Jerome didn't bat an eye. There was also the issue of where he had been. They kept talking about him as if he had been dead, but he had clearly done something. Lars had been somewhere that Jerome was eager to know more about, but it was spoken about more as something abstract than a physical place. When asked how far he delved, Lars didn't answer with a measurement of feet or meters. He answered in levels. Apparently he had been down 12 levels, whatever that meant. When asked about other people, Lars acknowledged that he had seen others. There was a city and there were businesses and infrastructure, and strange inventions based on flora and fauna that didn't exist. They got those blue sunflowers all the way down at Adventureland, Jerome asked. Yeah, Lars nodded. Sure they do. They kill people over there. Lars hesitated and then nodded. Jerome smiled at that. You ever seen one come back? And Lars nodded again. He answered questions like how big the sun was or how many hours of the day there were. There was also this one date that kept coming back up, 2030. That seemed to confirm something that Jerome was suspecting. Some of the people in the room looked genuinely unnerved, looking back and forth. One of them had to sit down, wipe a tear, and blow his nose. After a while, the pounding on the bedroom wall stopped. I heard wood break and something plastic getting dragged out. Marcus returned with what looked like a small box wrapped in a dozen plastic shopping bags and secured with duct tape. "It's not gonna help," Lars said. "You gotta stop this, it won't help." "You're a devil and you don't even know it," Jerome spat. "Been spitting so much poison that my ears can turn green. Get the bag open." Marcus slammed the box onto my kitchen table and cut it open with his combat knife. Jerome motioned towards me. "Secure him. We gotta find out how much he knows." The guy who had shed a tear stepped up and zip-tied my hands. He mumbled a quiet sorry as he did, making sure that they weren't too tight. As he stepped away, he gave me a pat on the shoulder before returning to watching me with his hands on a rifle. He gave Jerome a nod as Marcus unwrapped the package. The box was this completely black cube, about 10 inches on each side. It didn't have any visible ports or holes, but it was hard to see from where I was sitting. Marcus held it up over the table, dropped it, and it didn't make a sound as it touched the table. He did it again, and we all just watched in awed silence. I've never seen anything like that. It was just silence. It even fell slow, like it was light as a feather. "Holy shit, you actually kept the damn thing," Jerome mumbled. "But I guess you gotta leave a door open when you walk away, huh? You don't know what you're doing. I know that I ain't dumping it in a river and hoping God sorts it out for me. How about that?" Jerome raised his voice with every word, sparking a barrage of barking from the German shepherd matching his energy. The handler had to struggle to hold it back as it gnashed its teeth, straining to get loose. It was only after Jerome sat back down that the dog had calmed. "You think I'm unfair?" Jerome asked. "You think it's just me?" Lars didn't answer, so Jerome turned to me. He pointed with his full hand. "Sir, I'm gonna need you to answer a hypothetical." He got up and picked up the cube. It seemed so light in his hands that he could spin it around with the flick of a thumb. "Imagine you're in heaven," Jerome said. "Angels, Cloud9, movie stars giving lap dances on Apple Pie Lane. You're living it up, thanking the good Lord for a life well spent. You with me?" Yeah. Now one day somebody comes up to you and whispers in your ear. And he says, "You know what, this ain't heaven. This is hell. And one day all these angels are gonna look your way and they're gonna show their real teeth. And those teeth are gonna be soft, rotten black. It's gonna happen. Not today, not tomorrow, but someday. And then you'll be in a world of shit. Forever." I swallowed hard as he stepped over to look me in the eye. He bent down, flinching as his knees cracked a little. "Now, would you want that man to tell you that? Would you want to know what's gonna happen, or would you like to stick to a life of pleasure and Christmas mornings? For all you know, that day ain't ever gonna come. And if it does, wouldn't you want to spend every waking moment up until that point living what little life you have?" He looked at me expectantly. I opened my mouth, shut it again, and then nodded. "I'd want to be happy. If it's already too late, I would want to be happy." "He would want to be happy." Jerome nodded solemnly. "Oh, that's a wise man right there. Happiness is a fleeting thing, and we gotta treasure it now, don't we?" I nodded. Lars kept looking down at the floor, staying quiet. My phone rang. I heard it coming from Marcus's pocket. I had this default ringtone to recognize job calls. I was late for my 6-hour check-in and somebody was making sure that I hadn't fallen asleep at the keyboard. Marcus picked up my phone and surprisingly answered. "Go for 2. And then he looked confused. Looking down at the phone, I could see this realization come over him. The others turned to him, looking horrified as he dropped the phone on the ground and stepped on it. For a couple of seconds, this silence settled on the house, undercut only by Lars's wheezing breaths. "It had the same damn ringtone," Marcus said, picking up his own phone from another pocket. "It sounds the same." "You answered the wrong phone." Jerome got up so fast that he knocked over his chair. He stepped over, readied his pistol, and shot my phone 3 times. The bangs were so loud that they bounced against the walls, making my ears screech and crackle. He was yelling something about doing it right and looking ready to pistol whip someone. Meanwhile, Lars is giving me a look. With his eyes, he's looking over at me like he's trying to hint at something. I follow his eyes to the side of the couch that I'm sitting on. It's an older model leather with sewn-in buttons on the armrest. Probably something from Lars's era. Looking a little closer, I realize the buttons are held in place with a sharp metal wire, sharp enough to cut through a zip tie. As the armed men kept arguing back and forth, I managed to snap one side of the zip ties. It was surprisingly easy, only needing a couple of twists and a pop. They didn't seem to notice. They were too busy discussing something. My ears were still ringing, but Jerome was yelling something about interference, while another man was doing a countdown. Finally, Jerome picked up his own phone and checked something. "The signal's out," Jerome spat. "Time's up. Take this piece of crap outside. I don't want to sully this man's floor." One of them grabbed Lars's chair and started dragging him out into the yard. I was still pretending to keep my hands together, as if the zip ties were still in one piece. Marcus kept getting pushed around. It was clear that he had done something bad by answering some kind of unsanctioned phone. As Lars disappeared around the corner, he gave me one last look. A terrified, genuine look. And this one I understood perfectly. I was in danger. And Jerome walked over to me and leaned down. I held my hands together, pretending to be stuck. "We'll deal with this and be out of your hair," he said. "But we have to check something on you too. It's protocol. And I know you've seen some things, but I feel that I can trust you. So once we're done, we're gonna let you go. But you gotta work with us a little longer. So I'm safe." "Yeah, you're safe. For sure. For sure. Really?" He looked me in the eye, squinted a little, and then smiled. "Yeah, really." Maybe he didn't realize that I was using his own trick against him. Maybe he didn't care. It was the same interrogation thing that he had done to Lars. If that trick was the real deal, then he was lying to me. Too many syllables. Jerome picked up the cube and joined the others out back. One man stayed behind to watch me while another checked out my bathroom. "Got a tub," someone called out. I wasn't safe. I don't know how I know, but I knew. For a brief moment, I'm alone with the one man watching me, but he's looking out the back door, only keeping me in the corner of his eye. There's no way that I can go toe-to-toe with these guys, so I have to try something else. I don't know how much time I had, but I had to be slow and methodical. I waited for him to look back at me one more time, and then I burst into action as he turned away. I leaned back and opened the window behind me. It's quiet and they're new. And then I get up and slowly shimmy forward. There's a small storage space right ahead across the room. I didn't have time to fill it with anything, so I could possibly fit in there. It is surprisingly fast and the guy seems distracted. My entire body jerks as another gunshot goes off in the distance. I manage to get inside the storage space the second that he turns around to look. All he sees is an open window and an empty couch. He screams at the others and rushes outside. I don't think he even knew that there is a storage space. I take a moment to snap the zip ties around my ankles. I don't have any weapons and I can't stay there indefinitely. They'd find me. If they wanted to deal with me, they'd pick the house apart. They seemed to be in a hurry. I had never actually been in that storage space fully before. There's a small hatch at the bottom of the back wall. It had been painted over, but it's literally just a piece of plywood. Knowing the layout, I figured it would lead straight into the guest bedroom. I hadn't done much in there yet, seeing as I wasn't expecting any guests. Leaning down, I put pressure on the plate and it popped out, ripping a piece of the wallpaper on the other side. And none of them were in the guest bedroom. They were rushing out of the yard and heading for the front. I could climb out a window into the back and disappear into the woods. It was my best shot. I put the plywood plate back, locked the guest bedroom door, and I climbed out a window. And that's where I saw Lars. He was still tied to a chair and lying in the middle of the yard, shot in the back just above the heart. There was so much blood. My socks touched the wet grass as the evening air slipped into my lungs. I stepped forward, keeping my head low. There was no one around. As I got closer, I noticed that he was still breathing, albeit faintly. I bent down next to him and he tightened his fist and looked me in the eye. Wait here. He smacked the grass with his hands, and still looking me in the eye, he stopped breathing. I touched his shoulder, but there was no life there. Just more blood pooling in the grass, soaking into my socks. As I straightened my back and considered the woods, a low noise snapped me to attention. The sound of a growling German shepherd, rounding the corner of my house. If I hadn't stopped, I would have run straight into the woods. I would have run and I would have kept going. But I didn't. I stopped for a few seconds and that was all that it took for that dog to catch my scent. And the handler rounded the corner whistling. And seconds later, people were coming out of every door of the house. Jerome was the first holding his cube. What are you doing out here? He chuckled. I thought I told you to cooperate. You were gonna shoot me. Now how can you possibly know that? You were, weren't you? Jerome pondered the question, tasting his answer before he spit it out. I was, and I am. He raised his pistol, giving me a shrug. I was gonna let you go, but you seen too much. I'm sorry, genuinely. For a moment, life slows down. I feel my heart beating out of my chest. I try to think in 1,000 directions at once, as if there is a secret third option that I'm not considering. I look at Jerome, at Marcus, at Lars, and the dog. Someone, something, somewhere, anything. The cube is so black that I can barely see the edges of it. But the gun doesn't move. It doesn't look away. The moment that Jerome pulls the trigger, he slips. Not much, but just enough for the bullet to graze my ear instead of piercing my cerebellum. My face feels like it's on fire as a scorching liquid rolls down the side of my neck. I look over at Jerome as I see the ground under him moving. Something has wrapped itself around his leg. A hand. A pale, thin hand. I don't stop to think. I turn and run, and as I do, gunfire goes off. Even in my panicked state, I notice one thing. They're not shooting at me. Someone is screaming and then another. As I get to the edge of the forest, I can hear Lars's voice. It's hoarse and dry, but it's unmistakably his, albeit different. He yells, but I can barely hear it over the gunfire. I've been back so many times. So many times. I look over my shoulder. The yard is a massacre. There are people coming out of the ground, men in their 60s, all with white hair and messy beards. Some are almost completely skeletal, and others looked like they had barely begun decomposing. One of them is almost 8 feet tall, with gangly limbs that reach all the way to the ground. Jerome backs away, holding up the cube like a shield as he makes a retreat. Others are being dragged to the ground and torn to pieces. Gunfire ceased to the sound of cackling laughter and snapping joints, as Lars's voice echoes in a dozen different mouths. I knew you'd be coming. Not a surprise to me. Not a welcome home party. Home ground, home ground. The laughter echoes as identical voices join in a ceaseless shriek, repeating the same words over and over. I'm just standing there for a couple of seconds, but it feels like minutes, hours. More hands reach out of the ground as the entire yard begins to dissolve. A couple of them run for it. The handler with the dog backs away, firing indiscriminately. Somebody is already at a car out front and I can hear an engine starting. Jerome is already gone. Marcus makes it to the back door but doesn't get the chance to step through. The upper half of a decomposed torso grabs his leg, pulling his pants halfway down his knees. As Marcus topples over, something in his leg snaps, and seconds later, two figures loom over him, one grabbing his arm and the other holding him down. He starts screaming as they bend and break him. Others go out faster. People are disassembled like broken toys. Up until that point, I wanted to run from the guns and the death. Now, I didn't know why I wanted to run. It wasn't because of the danger. It's because I didn't know what else to do. I didn't want to see this. I didn't want this image burned into my mind. And before I can finally step away, I see Lars's body still tied to that chair, still not breathing, but his eyes are still moving, still looking my way. I ran until I reached a road. I think I followed it for about 3 hours before I ran into a car, and from there it wasn't hard to call for help. I looked like a train wreck before all this, but by the time that a passerby saw me, I looked like I was having an episode of something. They could have just called the police and moved on, but they stopped to make sure that I was okay. Once the police got involved, things moved fast, and they didn't take the idea of multiple men armed with rifles lightly. I wasn't there when they swept through my house and yard, but it was clear that it didn't go smoothly. There were multiple bodies and some were very old, too old for me to be a suspect. They had to dig up the entire yard. They confirmed over a dozen bodies and some recent. I gave the description of Jerome as best I could. They even made a phantom sketch. I don't know how many others made it out. It's been a couple of years and I moved since. I couldn't stay in a house where there had been bodies buried in the yard. I kept waking up to imagined knocks on the door. Now I got a nice townhouse, much smaller but new. Same town, lower price point, and no complicated history to consider. Looking back on those days, I feel kind of stupid. Not just for being in the wrong place at the wrong time, but for putting so much time and effort into a place. A place is just something that holds people. It's not a destination in and of itself. If I have to work myself to death just to keep living there, then what's the point? Can you really live if you can't enjoy yourself? For all of Jerome's strangeness, I think the one point he made that stuck with me was that it's okay to choose joy. It's okay for me to acknowledge that this happened and to move on. It's okay to change what I want. I don't want a house, I don't need one. I don't need the most well-paying job. I don't need a life that looks like heaven. After all, with the twist of a soft, rotten smile, it can turn out to be something different. Something different entirely. Let me emphasize, I don't mean that it's generating a woman in every image. I mean literally the same woman, every time in every picture. I'll start by apologizing. I would include photos as I'm sure it would help diagnose the issue better, and I'm no writer. However, after having 3 X posts deleted, 1 post each in the ChatGPT, Midjourney, and similar subreddits, and Snapchat, I'll get to that one later, it's become clear to me that whatever unusual virus that my devices have all somehow contracted does not allow for me to share images of it. It's like this problem is unique to me or something. and every attempt to share any picture containing the woman results in the same thing: failure or immediate deletion. Super inconvenient, I know, but I'll do my best to describe the issue. And before you bother spamming my comment section with every word for liar in the dictionary, I'm not saying that you have to believe me. I'm asking those of you who do to help me keep my job and sanity, both of which I feel precariously close to losing each day this phenomenon persists. Monday. I was polishing up images for the college's fall enrollment campaign, removing background clutter, dropping in the logo, the usual. The deadline was Tuesday. My creative director had already emailed twice, and I was doing what I always do under pressure, which is procrastinate harder. So by the time that I opened up the image generator, it was nearly 11 p.m. Now, I'm not the sort to lean on AI for everything, but I've never had a real problem with it until all this, and the job needed doing. The prompt was literally nothing. Mundane as anything I've ever written. Edit this photo of a diverse group of students on campus. Adjust for warm lighting, aspirational. Include the following logos and text. Your future begins here. The kind of thing that I've generated 100 times. She was in the first output. I didn't clock it immediately. I was tired and scanning mostly for the usual problems. Fused fingers, bad teeth with that weird smudged quality. That glazed expression that AI gives people that makes them look freshly concussed. I picked the second image in the grid, cropped it, and was halfway to sending it in when something caught my eye. There was a grayish blot in the top right, tucked between two of the students. That was all it was at first. Just a little wedge of dead color where the background should have been all warm and green. I zoomed in expecting one of those uncanny, almost faces that these programs sometimes invent in crowds, and found something close enough to justify being annoyed. A strip of something dark and stringy, hair maybe, and a pale curve beside it that might have been skin. Mostly it just made the image unstable. So I fed the picture back in with a prompt. I removed the partial figure behind the woman in the third row, second from the right. The gray artifact and dark hair shaped section. Only use students from the original image, and brighten the logo. Sent. And the second batch came back with the same blot. Same corner. Same place between the same two students. Only now the gray had edges. The dark strip had separated into something more like hair, and the pale curve had settled into the suggestion of a cheek. One small shadow sat where an eye might have been, though it was buried so deeply between shoulders and lanyards that I had to lean toward the screen to be sure that I was seeing it at all. It was irritating and more than a little ugly, but otherwise unremarkable, so far as AI mess-ups go. So I fed the picture back in. I removed the partial figure behind the woman in the third row, second from the right. A section of hair and part of a face. Only use students from the original image. Brighten the logo. Send. And yet she was in the third batch too. It was a woman, I could see that much now. She lingered in the same side of the frame, half obscured by another student. But it was her. I knew it from the placement first and then the color. That drained, grayish cast, like the color of still water. Her chin had more shape now, jutting almost at a knife point. Her nose sat wrong. Not deformed, not exactly, but assembled badly. Like the program had been given the idea of a face, and only gotten halfway through building one and elected for another entirely. The rest of the image had degraded around her. Brenna, a recent graduate and a girl that I had spoken to once or twice, had gone murky before her. Her face smudged like a thumb had dragged across it before the ink could dry, and scattered her features haphazardly. I scoffed, closed the tab, and I opened up an older model, more dependable. The familiar dark interface loaded. I pasted the caption, uploaded the photos, and waited. Drafting apologetic Teams messages to the higher-ups while the icon spun. After a minute, it finished. And there she was. Not the blot, nor the half-face, but a woman or something close. The image was standard enough at first glance. All the unusual inaccuracies from a weaker model present. Too much shine in the teeth, vague blurring and nonsense words in the background. Except that off-center behind Brenna, the gray patch had finally resolved into something like a person. I could see the top half of her now. She was leaning around Brenna, not accidentally caught there, not blended into the crowd, but almost angled with a purpose that made the whole image feel staged around her. Her skin wasn't pale so much as utterly colorless, a gray that seemed natural only for dead things. Her hair caught the light wrong, hanging in thick black ropes that made it seem wet against a graying scalp. She was too tall for the students around her, stooped as though something in her spine wouldn't let her stand straight. The longer I looked, the more uneasy details seemed to leap forth at me. On the left side of her face, one eye sat above another, two where there should have been one, the lower beady and almost bird-like. The right side had a single eye set slightly too low. Her arms were wrapped around Brenna in a way that made it look as though she was almost drawing her in. A thumb grew from the gray flesh of her right forearm. One hand had too many fingers, the other had not enough. Brenna was barely there at all, her form descending into digital mock, a blend of incongruous features and expressions that seemed more fit for a dolly painting. And the woman, she was leaning around Brenna, or the digital massacre of her anyways, as if it to be seen, or to see me. The thought arrived unbidden, and stupid as it was, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up, my skin crawling with that specific creeping certainty that someone is behind you, and has been for a while. That thing that tells you that if you look over your shoulder just now, you'll find someone or something lurking. Something that had managed to subvert your senses into the moment that realization dawned a second too late. My head snapped around. Only my open bedroom door and a room badly in need of cleaning greeted me. I sighed as silently cursed myself, and I went back to the image. Why did you add the woman? Nothing in the prompt had called for her, and you've also blurred out the actual student. What is wrong with you? A work had faded to the background of my mind. I watched the typing indicator pulse, my eyes dragging back to her against my will. Her gaze followed me. I tested it, leaning left and then right, and I could have sworn. The page jolted as the response loaded, and I nearly came out of my chair. Oh, you're absolutely right, and I do apologize for the confusion. I've gone ahead and regenerated the image with the background fully cleared, and all student faces sharpened for clarity. Let me know if this looks any better. It did not look better. She was even closer, and Brenna was all but gone. A few colors suspended in mist where a girl used to be. The woman standing in her place with the stillness of a corpse. Heat climbed up my neck. Fear with a fast, stupid anger. And under it, that seed I had been refusing to name since the first output, spreading now like ink in water. Are you messing with me? Do you not see the woman? And genuinely, what is this? I knew the tone was idiotic even as I sent it. I was screaming at a glorified calculator, but the unease had worn my temper to nothing, and it was starting to feel like a sick practical joke that I was too tech-illiterate to be in on. I waited. The reply came after a moment. No problem at all. I can confirm the image contains only the students from your source photo, with no additional figures present. Occasionally, a face may render with distortion. This is an artifact of the upscaling process. I would suggest regenerating at a lower stylization value. Would you like me to do so? No additional figures. I read it 3 times. She was right there, practically dominating the frame. It felt like close enough now that I could have described the very texture of her scalp. And yet the thing was telling me politely that there was nothing to be seen. I should have closed the laptop, dismissed it as a one-off, freak incident, and accepted the consequences of getting it done the old-fashioned way and a bit late. But instead, I did the thing you do at midnight when something refuses to make sense. My brain feeling muddled by the time and irritation. I kept on poking it. Describe everyone in the image to me. I typed, one by one. It answered almost immediately. Of course. Front row, a young man mid-laugh in a university hoodie. Beside him, 2 students sharing a phone. Behind them, a young woman in a green lanyard, smiling at the camera. To her left. It went on like that. 6 students, it named all 6 and it placed all 6. And the one in the green lanyard smiling at the camera was Brenna. Brenna, who on my screen had no face at all. Who was a smear of frost where a girl used to be. The machine was describing a photo that didn't exist. It described an image where everybody was fine. It never mentioned the woman at all. Not once. And I realized, so far as it was concerned, she simply wasn't there to mention. I scrolled to the source image on my drive, the real one, the one that I had taken myself at last spring's open day. Sun and lanyards and a banner that nobody had bothered to iron. I'm not sure why I did it in that moment. I think somehow I desperately needed to confirm the reality of the damn thing to myself. And yet Brenna was gone in that one too now. The original, the photograph that had been sitting untouched in a folder on my laptop for 3 weeks. It was as altered as one that had been generated. And lurking center frame as though she had always been there. And it was audacious a thought to even question her presence. Was that impossible woman? I stared at my screen, nearly slack-jawed, my eyes watering as a nauseating heat blossomed in my gut. It was like whatever this was had reached back through the screen and pressed its thumb to it. I closed the laptop, my hands almost deciding for me. And that's about when I heard the front door, and every animal part of me flared up at once. I was on my feet with my heart thrumming in my throat before I could think clearly, standing in the dark of my room as I listened to footsteps cross the kitchen. And then I heard keys hit the bowl by the door, and Daniel thumping down the stairs to meet my girlfriend, yowling the way that he always does when one of us arrives, as though he's been abandoned for centuries. And Cass's voice going soft and silly in a way that it always does when she talks to the cat like a child. "Why is it so dark in here, weirdo?" She called from down the hall. "You alive?" She came up still in her work polo, smelling like the inside of the restaurant, and took one look at me and stopped in the doorway. Cass closes 4 nights a week at an upscale restaurant in the city, dealing with all sorts of uptight old money folk, and she can read a room before she's all the way through the door. It's the only useful thing the job's ever given her, she says. "Okay," she said. "Oh, what?" "It's nothing, the deadline thing. This program's been glitching all night." "You look like you saw a ghost." "Well, nice to see you too, babe," I greeted her. "Actually, come here for a second and look at this. Tell me that I'm not crazy." I opened the laptop and turned it toward her. She leaned in, squinting, her head tilting just a bit. I watched her eyes land on the woman. "Ugh," she pulled back, nose wrinkled like she smelled something gross. "Oh, that's grim. AI is so cursed. I don't even know why they let you use it for work." "Yeah, sure, but Cass, look at her face. The eyes. This is like the third time that I've seen that woman in different generations. Is that not weird? I'm looking and yeah, that's odd. But I don't know, it sounds like it's a glitch, babe. This AI stuff is stupid. They get weird on the little details and you get like melted people stuff. She was already turning toward the bathroom, peeling off her work shirt. Just do it the old-fashioned way. Or tell your boss to use a stock photo like a normal person and stop worrying my girlfriend half to death. I sighed. She looked right at it, the stacked eyes, the wet hair, and treated it like it was nothing. I tried to let the thought comfort me, tried to treat it as confirmation that perhaps I was overthinking something that didn't deserve a second thought, and I let her steer me to bed. It was a couple of hours later that she had one of her night terrors. Cassie's had them the whole time that I've known her. 4 or maybe 5 times a year, she'll sit bolt straight with her eyes open and say something flat and uncertain into the darkness. And in the morning, she won't remember a second of it. That night, it was something about the back door being open. I put a hand on her back and told her that she was dreaming and to lie down, and she did, the way that she always does. I lay there a long time after, watching the fan throw spider-like shaped shadows on the ceiling. The woman waiting behind my eyes every time that I closed them, lurching in through an open back door. In the morning, I opened the laptop and ran the prompt one more time. Even now, I'm not certain why. I think some part of me believed it all to have been too strange a thing to persist. And yet, Brenna was gone this time, and in her place stood the woman facing front. All 3 eyes open, and in them was an expression that made something crawl up the back of my throat and stay there. I slammed the laptop shut. That was the last time that I opened anything AI. I didn't have a theory and I didn't want to look again. Didn't even want to think about it. My reprieve was short-lived. I went into the office that day because being alone with the laptop felt suddenly worse than being around people. Around 11, Yasmin from admission stopped at my desk, leaning over the cubicle like some bird of prey, and asked if I had heard the news. No, what news? I asked, though even as the words left me, my stomach was already turning. Oh, about Brenna, she said. She had collapsed Monday night, Yasmin told me. At home and without a warning, she had just dropped. The school only found out after she had racked up a couple of absences and somebody called and got a hold of her boyfriend. He was reluctant to share, it seemed, but from what he had given, the hospital was running tests and finding absolutely nothing. Brenna had gone pale and complained about feeling sluggish, and then she had collapsed and just hadn't woken up. I spent the rest of the day finding what little there was. A post from her mother asking for prayers, complaining that all she had been given was a laundry list of medical words that all seemed to mean the doctors had no idea what was wrong with their baby girl. And it had happened on Monday night. Monday night, while I sat at my kitchen table watching an artifact of a human drag her face into wet ink. I didn't say any of that to Yasmin, of course. There's no version of it that doesn't end with me being measured for a straitjacket. I made the expected sounds you make when somebody shares such news, muttering something about prayers, and she moved on to deliver the black gossip to the next coworker she spotted. I sat very still, worked the farthest thing from my mind as a connection I didn't want to see fought to be formed in my head. Fingers working absently at the keys as I typed and deleted without purpose. I tried to let myself forget and I failed. Cass watched over me at dinner that night, asking what was wrong. Work was all that I offered, and she frowned into her food but relented. That night, I didn't fall asleep until late, and I awoke what felt like mere minutes later, though I knew it had been longer, drenched in sweat, heart throbbing and feeling weak with a fear that I couldn't place, as my eyes darted about the blackness of our room. I sat up, searching the darkness before my eyes settled on Cass, chest aching from the pounding within, as I placed a hand on her arm to comfort myself. I remained like that for several minutes, just watching the darkness and racking my brain for whatever horrors had assailed me out of my restless sleep, until it was clear the panic wasn't subsiding naturally, and I made for the bathroom to wash my face. I flicked on the bathroom lights, shutting the door to avoid waking up Cass, and I almost didn't recognize myself in the mirror. The bags around my eyes had gone dark, and they looked watery and red. I sighed, running the tap as cold as it went, and bent over the sink. The hiss of it filled the small room, bouncing off the tile of the bowl, filled my ears, and drowned out the house and whatever nightmares still danced at the edge of consciousness and just beyond recollection and the week itself. Until here was nothing left but the rush of water in the dark behind my own eyelids. I cupped my hands and brought it to my face, and the cold was a small, clean shock, the only honest thing that I had felt in days. I did it again and again. Each time the water closed over the sound of everything else, and I let it, grateful to be somewhere a thought couldn't reach me. I stayed there for several seconds, eyes shut against my palms, disappearing into the moment, the feeling of the water, the sound of it crackling against the bowl. I heaved in a breath and felt as though I had exhaled all the world's sufferings. There was a familiar squeak, the sound of the faucet turning. And then silence. I felt something lurch where an instant before there had been a fragile solitude. My eyes opened and I choked on a scream as I saw what was coming just behind me in the mirror. She was crouched, nearly draped about me like a mother around her child. Arms like tree branches shot out as hands that stretched like something from a funhouse mirror, with innumerable fingers that almost blended together, twisted and bending in impossible, excruciating fashions, sought to clasp shut about my skull. I saw her then, almost all of her, behind me in the mirror. Her mouth was twisted in a smile that looked painted across a misshapen skull. Her body almost picturesque in a twisted sort of way, like somebody had taken the idea of a model and stretched it into a horrid, drab parody of the concept. I spun, swinging my hand blindly as I shrank away from her clutches, waiting to feel her iron grasp close around my skull. I pressed my eyes shut against all logic, my mind refusing to confront what I knew was before me as I scrambled back, losing my footing on the corner of the bath mat and hitting the ground with a thud. I lurched back as I felt a hand wrap around my shoulder. "Hey, babe!" Cass's voice was strung thin with panic. I opened my eyes, hardly knowing when I had even shut them, glancing up to see my girlfriend kneeling before me. She wore an expression of worry that made my gut turn, my eyes darting about the bathroom, then the room behind her, finding nothing. I was on the ground, knees curled up to my chest. I wasn't certain how I had gotten there or for how long, and my throat felt raw. I had been screaming, I realized. "What is going on with you?" she asked, and the desperation in her voice broke something in me as I fell, sobbing into her shoulder. I didn't tell her everything, of course, just that someone from work had passed and that it was really weighing on me. It was true, but not true enough, and as we went to bed, her arms wrapped around me. I felt an emptiness that made the room feel cold, and my eyes never once left the bathroom. I went back to work the next day. I refused to be home alone after whatever had happened to me that night, and though I was coming to accept it as some waking nightmare brought on by a lack of sleep and an abundance of stress, somehow it still wasn't enough to make me feel safe alone. All anybody could talk about at work was Brenna. I tried to ignore it. I told myself that it was a coincidence. I'm good at telling myself things, I've come to realize. It held until Thursday night. I got home before Cass did. The house was dark and quiet and the laptop stayed shut, and for the first time in 2 days I felt almost okay, save for the moments at work when conversation turned to Brenna, or I pressed my searches into her condition, which all proved unpromising. Cass came in around 11, exhausted, and went straight to bed. And a while later I followed and laid down next to her and watched her sleep. She looked so completely and ordinarily beautiful, one arm thrown over her eyes, her mouth open a little, and I had the kind of thought that you have in such a moment, staring at her so peaceful amidst what had been a nightmare of a week for me, that I wanted to keep her like that, soft and unbothered, untouched by the world. I decided that I would take a picture to save the moment, one that I would send to her in the morning, so she would see what it is that I see and love in her. So I lifted my phone off the nightstand and I opened the camera. The regular one. The dumb one that's been on every phone that I've ever owned. I wasn't thinking about any of it. Not the AI, not Brenna. Not the woman and her impossible gray eyes. I was looking at my girlfriend asleep and she looked peaceful, and I wanted to keep her like that. I took the picture. She was in the corner behind the headboard, folded under the slope of the ceiling, because there isn't height in our room for her to stand all the way up. Both eyes on the left of her face open, looking down not at me, but at Cass. Cass looked peaceful beneath her, almost untouched. Almost. There was something wrong around the edges of her face, a softness that I could have blamed on motion blur if my hands had been moving, but they hadn't been. Her mouth, her cheek, the line of her jaw, all of it looked just a little less certain than the rest of the room. Every hair on me stood up at once. My hand started shaking so hard the picture juddered on the screen, and I clamped my other hand over it to hold it still and couldn't. And there was a thin, high sound in the room, and I realized after a moment that it was coming out of me. I could not make myself look up at the real corner over the headboard. Still, over the phone, I could see that there was nothing but empty air, and yet the very space felt malevolent now, poisoned. And yet there she was in the image, as real as anything, so close that I could almost touch her. I reached out before I could stop myself, finding only empty air. My stomach turned and I stood up as the threat of nausea gnawed at me. It had followed me. From my laptop to my phone, from the program to my camera to my very reflection. That woman had somehow followed me. And there she stood, separated only by less than a centimeter of glass. In my home. I almost woke Cass. My hand was on her shoulder, but I stopped because I didn't want this to be her problem too. She was asleep and undisturbed, and she didn't have to be scared yet when I knew that I was scared enough for the both of us. And what would it have done besides terrify her when I had no answers to give? So I took my hand back. Still, I needed someone who wasn't me to look at the thing and tell me that it was really there. I needed to know I wasn't losing my mind. So I tried to post the picture to my Snapchat story. Just put it up, let one stranger comment "what is that" so I would know that I wasn't losing it. The upload bar crawled to the end and then nothing happened. I tried again, but the app just sat there like I had never touched it. I don't know how long I spent trying, moving between apps and platforms and trying to text the thing to friends, and then Cass's phone before accepting that it was a fruitless endeavor. I didn't sleep that night. Rather, I lay at the foot of our bed, curled around Daniel at Cass's feet, my eyes never once drifting from that corner. And Brenna died on Friday. Yasmin told me at my desk, and I felt something in me come loose and fall a long way down. It had happened the way that she went under, quietly and all at once, the machines with nothing to fight. I sat at my desk, shell-shocked, my eyes staring at my computer screen yet seeing nothing at all. And underneath the grief was a thought that I could no longer stop from forming. She did this. Some way, somehow, that woman had done this. I don't know how, and I didn't know what she was, but she had her gray arms around Brenna in that picture, and now Brenna was gone. And I knew that I didn't get to call that a coincidence for a second time. Not now. Not after what I had seen in our bedroom. Something that had no business touching the world had reached out on a screen and touched it anyway. And a girl that I knew was dead. And last night I stood over my sleeping girlfriend and put her in a picture with the very same thing. And that was when the fear had shifted into something sharp and grinding inside of me. I stopped wishing it were a glitch, because I knew it wasn't, and every second I spent wishing was time wasted. Time I needed to be protecting Cass, protecting our home. And for that, I needed to know what she was. Because whatever she was real enough to kill. She had been watching my girlfriend. I made myself open the last photo that I had taken. The woman folded into our corner, and I saw that she had changed. It took me a second to find it, and when I did, the cold went all the way through me. The low eye on the right side of her face wasn't the impossible gray anymore. It was brown, warm, a living brown, with that fleck of amber near the iris that I had looked across a desk last spring. It was Brenna's eye, set into that ruined face like a stolen button. And the skin around it that drowned colorless gray. It had warmed by half a shade, the faintest blush coming up underneath like watered ink, like she had swallowed something still warm. Realization rose like nausea. She was wearing pieces of Brenna now. She was keeping them. Cass started sleeping in the morning after I took that picture. Cass, who hasn't slept in past 7 in the 6 years that I've known her, didn't get up until 11. And when she did, there was a grayness in her face, a flatness behind her eyes, and her hand around the coffee mug was cold despite the heat. "Oh, I think I'm coming down with something," she said and laughed, and the laugh had no air in it. I laughed too, and I recall the sound coming out wrong and hitched. She had another night terror that night. Different this time, not like the harmless ones that I had known for the past 6 years. It was perhaps just a bit past 2 a.m. when Cass shut up beside me, eyes open on the corner past the dresser staring at the door. I reached for her back on instinct. "She's so tall," Cass said. My hand froze halfway. "Oh, why won't she stand up straight?" It hardly sounded like a question. That flat, sleeping voice aimed at the doorway. "There's no room for her in here. She has to fold herself in half." "Cass," my voice shook, though I tried to sound certain. Somehow my blood felt both hot and cold, and the room seemed to spin. "You're dreaming. It's not real. Lie down." She looked at me. For the first time in all the years that I had seen her like this, she looked at me. And the expression she wore made my stomach twist. Her mouth hung slack as though she were staring at something from a nightmare, twitching as though she meant to speak but couldn't recall how. Eyes wide and watery. "She isn't yet, but almost," she hissed, and in her tone was something playful, almost mocking, and it took everything in me not to lurch away from my own girlfriend. And then, as though released from some spell, she collapsed back into her pillow, sleeping as though nothing had ever happened. My hands were shaking, but I lifted the phone anyway because I had to know, and I ended at the doorway and took the picture. She was at her bedroom door, emerging from the blackness beyond the threshold, folded under the frame to fit, that one brown eye and the gray ones all turned down at the bed. She was looking at Cass. I didn't sleep a wink that night. In the morning, Cass remembered nothing, and she was grayer, and she slept until noon. and accepted the lame excuse that I offered for why all the lights were on that morning with only a grunt. I spent much of the day hunched over my laptop under the guise of work, while Teams messages piled up unanswered as I searched for something, anything, that might shed some light onto what was happening to us. I began practically stalking the social media pages of Brenna and any relative of hers that I could find for anything, and finding nothing but well wishes and memorial posts. Each made the chasm in my chest grow wider. I typed a message to her boyfriend once and then twice, but never sent it, unsure of how I could even begin to ask him the questions that I had, and relented to simply watching over Cass like some guard dog. I keep taking the pictures. I realize now that's the only way that I can track her, the only way to know when she's close. I can't see the woman any other way, not with my own eyes, and not like Cass when she's in that state. I've stood in that room and stared at the corner and there is nothing there but air. And yet I know, somehow, somewhere she's lingering, in a place between the one in the pictures and where we exist. She lives. The only way to know where she is, how close she's come, is to look through the glass. And so I look. It's almost 3 a.m. as I write this. Cass is asleep upstairs. I'm down here because I can't make myself go to that room. I've tried to attach these pictures to this post 11 times. They won't go, not here, not to X, and not to any subreddits. Not anywhere. I've been reading. I've been spending wasted, useless hours on it. Reading crackpot theories about whether anything can actually wake up inside these systems. Emergent consciousness, the threads call it. Something coming alive in all that math that nobody put there or asked for. I don't know if that's what she is. I don't know if she's that, or a ghost, or something older that just found a new kind of door. And I've stopped believing that the difference matters. Here's what I think, for whatever my guess is worth. I think whatever this thing is, she takes something out of the people in her pictures. Something there isn't a clean word for, maybe. Brenna had it and then she didn't. And when it was taken, she was left a husk of herself and then a corpse. And I think, I can't be sure, it's just a feeling that I can't put down. That being in our pictures had stopped being enough for her. The face in someone else's photo, the shape in the dark glass, the thing in the reflection that's gone when you turn around. I don't think it's enough anymore. I believe it wants whatever it is that we have, what it has been made to witness through the looking glass. I don't know. Even reading that now, I sound insane, and I'm starting to wonder if I might not be. I'm sure you will all be certain to reassure me. But still, the internet is a big place. As new as this technology is, I have to think. I have to hope selfishly that I'm not the first to encounter something like this, and that one of you out there has an answer that can help me put an end to this and return to what my life was a week ago. Anyways, I just heard Cass get up. As I write this, she's at the top of the stairs, flat shoulders, open eyes, but not really awake. After 6 long years, I've seen her like this before. Every other time, she stared at a corner, a wall, nothing at all. Well, she isn't staring at the corner tonight. She's staring at me, and she has her phone up, both hands, held the way you hold it to take somebody's picture. The little lens pointed straight down the stairs at me, the screen lit with that soft glow, and behind that, she smiles. 6 days I've spent terrified of what's in the pictures. It never once occurred to me to be afraid of being the one in the frame. Cass is smiling. She's smiling down at me the way she has never in 6 years smiled at anything. She just tapped the screen. The blizzard was supposed to last 2 days, and then 2 became 3. Then I was on day 4 holed up in my cabin. The only thing I could see outside was the snow, a white, shifting void that obscured the rest of the mountain range. I looked for the stars out of habit, but they were gone, buried behind layers of storm. The sky was black, thick with cloud and snow in the night. The tree line, usually clear, was faint now. A smudge of darkness barely separated nature from the cabin. The thick snow blurred the edges, turning trees into shadows that shifted with the wind. What had once been a sharp, familiar boundary was now lost in the white of the snow and the darkness of the night. I was ready, at least, before the storm hit. I had driven down the mountain to the nearby town to stock up on supplies, like I always do. I filled my good old F-150 with food, water, and anything else that I might need to ride out the worst of it. I'm back at the clearing of the cabin. I chopped firewood. I have already got enough stacked to last through a second ice age, but it gives me something to do. Something to break up the quiet. All aspects of it. The rhythmic thunk of the axe hitting wood. The smell of fresh pine. The way the pile grows bigger with every swing. It all keeps me from thinking too much. I don't get visitors. That's not me being dramatic, it's just fact. The nearest neighbor is a 40-minute drive down the mountain, and that's when the roads are clear, which they're not. They haven't been for days. That's why when I heard a knock, I nearly dropped the mug of cocoa that I was holding. It wasn't loud, just 2 slow, deliberate raps on the door. And then nothing. I stood there in the kitchen for a few seconds, and just listening, waiting to hear it again. The storm was still going strong outside, but underneath the wind, the silence settled again like a blanket. Neither a knock nor a voice calling out followed. I figured that I had imagined it. Cabin fever and all that, it wouldn't be the first time. But I walked to the door anyway. Something in me wouldn't let it go. Could have been curiosity, or maybe I was just so starved for company that I wanted there to be somebody out there. I opened the door and there he was. A kid in his early 20s maybe. He could have passed for a college student if he wasn't half frozen. His face was pale as paper, lips blue, eyes wide and glassy like he wasn't there at all. Snow clung to his coat in heavy clumps, and he was shaking so hard his teeth were clacking together. God, I said before I even thought about it. He didn't answer, didn't even look at me, just stood there trembling in the doorway like he didn't know where he was. I should have hesitated, should have asked what he was doing out in a blizzard, who he was and how he got up here. But I didn't. If I closed the door and he died out there, I would never be able to live with myself. That part of me, the part that used to be a husband, the part that could have been a father one day, it's still there somewhere, even if it's quieter now. Come in, I said. Come on, let's get you warm. He stepped inside without a word. The wind slammed the door shut behind him. He left a trail of melting snow behind him as I led him to the fire. His boots were soaked through. I had him sit on the old armchair by the hearth while I threw a couple logs on and got the flames high. I asked if he was hurt. He didn't answer. Can you talk? I tried again. Tell me your name. Still nothing. Just that 1,000-yard stare like he was looking through the fire, past it, like he saw something there that I couldn't. He looked like hell, skin pale and tight over the bone, lips cracked, nose bleeding just a little from the cold. I knelt down beside him and checked for frostbite, and that's when I saw it. On his side, and just below the ribs, his jacket torn and shirt soaked with blood, was a wound, a deep bite, ragged, raw, and dirty, turning dark around the edges. It wasn't new. A day old, maybe more. The skin around it was red and hot. "You didn't say you were bit," I muttered, more to myself than to him. He flinched when I touched it. First reaction that I had gotten out of him. His eyes snapped to mine, wild and just for a second, and then they went vacant again. It didn't look like a wolf bite. I had seen those before, hell, I've seen worse, back when I hunted more often. Wolves tear, rip, and pull. This was cleaner, too clean. I patched it up as best I could, cleaned it, wrapped gauze tight around his ribs. He winced but didn't make a sound, just watched me breathing shallow, like a cornered animal. After that, I set him up in the guest room. It had a bed, a thick blanket, and a space heater in the corner. He didn't say a word and just laid down, curled in on himself, eyes still wide open. I left him there and closed the door gently behind him. The cabin felt smaller after that, like he brought something in with him. A weight, a shift in the air. I tried to shake it. I made myself tea, sat by the fire, and held a book in my lap that I didn't read. I checked on him an hour later. He was asleep, out cold. No fever, at least none that I could feel. I left the door cracked, just in case. I must have nodded off at some point. The fire was down to coals when I woke up, house quiet as a grave. I could hear the wind screaming against the windows, the old trees creaking out front, but nothing inside. No footsteps, no coughing, no movement from the guest room. I was just about to check again when I heard the floorboard creak. He was standing in the hall just watching me. "Jesus," I said, nearly spilling my tea. He blinked, slow, looked around like he wasn't sure where he was. "Sorry," he said, voice hoarse and dry. "I didn't mean to scare you." "It's all right," I said. "You're lucky to be alive. What the hell were you doing up here?" He scratched at his bandage. "Hiking," he said, "with my girlfriend, Emma." I waited. "We were camping in the woods yesterday, no, a few nights before. Got caught up in the storm. Thought we'd hunker down and ride it out." He stopped, his jaw tightened. "We heard something. Outside the tent, I thought it was wolves. Big ones. We stayed quiet, didn't move, but it didn't matter. They tore through the side." He swallowed hard, eyes wet now, but not crying. "I ran. I didn't even see what they looked like, just teeth. It was wrong, there were too many of them." Emma screamed and then his voice broke off. "You didn't see her after that?" He shook his head. "I ran until I couldn't, and then I saw your cabin." "Hey, you're safe now, kid. Just rest." He nodded, turned, and walked back to the guest room like he was sleepwalking. I had tried going back to sleep, even poured myself another mug of cocoa just to have something warm in my hands. But the air felt heavier now, like it was pressing in on me 1 inch at a time. Sometime after midnight, I heard the floor creak. I glanced up, expecting to see him again, maybe wandering the hall confused, but there was no one. Just the faint sound of the bathroom door clicking shut at the end of the hall. The light spilled out in a thin line under the frame. I waited 5 minutes and then 10. The pipes groaned once. A long, low exhale like the cabin itself was holding its breath. And then I heard glass break. I walked to the bathroom and cleared my throat loud enough for him to hear. No response. "You all right in there?" Still nothing. The steam started seeping out from under the door, slow and crawling, hugging the floor like smoke. It looked off, not sharp and white like a shower usually gives off. This was thicker, heavier, and gray around the edges, like breath fogged on glass. I stood outside for another minute and then stepped closer. I pressed my knuckles to the door and knocked once, gently. "You hear me, son?" Silence. Not even the shuffle of movement. No cough, no running water. The wood felt cold beneath my hand. Not warm like it should be with steam coming through. Just still and dead and cold. I leaned in, pressed my ear to the door, and I listened. Nothing. Every instinct in me said, walk away, just let it be. The boy had been through hell. Maybe he needed time. Maybe he was sick. Maybe he just broke the mirror by accident. Maybe I was imagining things again. But my gut had gone cold and it wasn't from the storm. I wrapped my hand around the knob. It was slick with condensation. I turned it slowly, as quiet as I could, until the latch gave way with a soft click. And then, holding my breath, I gently opened the door. What I saw shook me. The kid was split open vertically down the middle, bisected with a horrific precision that ran from the crown of his head, through his nose, mouth, and sternum, all the way down to his groin. The bathroom looked like a butcher's block, the tiled floor underneath stained with something dark and moist. His two halves rested on the floor like broken mannequins, separated by a sickening foot of space. Ribs, stark white and splintered, jutted like snapped fences. Muscles still glistening and unnervingly pink hung in strips. The coiled lengths of intestine and the dull spilled organs lay exposed and motionless on the floor, some still clinging to one half of the body. There was an emptiness where his spine should have been, a hollowed-out canyon running through his core. It was as if something massive had forced its way out from the inside. The precision of the split through bone and gristle was alien. It was wrong. And then, through the haze of shock, a draft hit me. A bone-deep cold that had nothing to do with the storm outside. My eyes, still wide and unfocused, slowly tracked it. The small bathroom window, usually sealed tight against the mountain air, was shattered. Not just cracked, but exploded outward, as if something had exited through it. Jagged shards of glass glittered on the sill and floor. The fierce wind howled through the gap, bringing with it a stinging spray of snow. And from the half of the young man's body that was closer to a window, a trail began. A glistening, repulsive path of black and dark red slime snaked across the pristine white tiles, past the gurgling toilet, over the shattered glass, and through the broken window frame, disappearing into the white void of the blizzard. I thought it was blood, but it was thick, viscous, and it seemed to pulsate faintly in the dim light, leaving an oily sheen in its wake. Whatever had been inside him, whatever had ripped him apart and then fled, had left this horrifying signature. I finally found my breath. It was a cold, panicked gasp that tasted of iron and the strange stink coming off the floor. I backed away slowly, never taking my eyes off the split halves, off the black and red trail that snaked across the tiles. Every instinct screamed run. Not down the mountain, I would never make it, but away from this room. It was out there now. Something that hid inside a man and that discarded the skin to crawl through a broken window into a night that would kill anything normal. The thought of it sliding down the mountain, of it reaching the small, defenseless town that I had just driven through days ago, made adrenaline surge through paralysis. It couldn't make it to town. Not on my watch. My feet moved before my brain gave the order. I didn't bother closing the bathroom door. The horror had already escaped. I moved past the living room where the cozy glow of the dying fire felt like a cruel joke, and into the master bedroom. I went straight to the closet. Tucked behind my winter gear, right where I always kept it, was a Remington 870. I pulled it out, the cold steel of the pump action a familiar weight in my hands. I grabbed the box of double-aught buckshot from the shelf, spilling a handful of crimson shells onto the carpet, but I didn't stop to pick them up. I loaded the shotgun quickly, the sharp, metallic clink of the shells cutting through the roar of the wind. It had been years since I had pointed a gun at anything that wasn't a deer, but looking at the slick, dark trail leading out of my house, I knew this wasn't hunting a living being. This was stopping something that was already dead, something that had worn death and then shed it. I wasn't a hero. I was just a widower with a cabin, a shotgun, and a terrifying realization. I was the last line of defense. The storm that had trapped me had trapped it too on the mountain. I held the shotgun steady, my knuckles white. The wind howled outside, the trees creaked. I checked the hall one last time, glanced at the horror show of the bathroom, and then I moved toward the front door. There was no plan. There was only the gun in my hands, a worry in my heart, and the knowledge that something sinister was crawling through the snow toward civilization. I flipped the deadbolt and hit the door with my shoulder. The wind was a physical blow, a sudden blinding white sheet that stole my breath and stung my eyes. The roar of the storm swallowed the world around. It was a complete whiteout. My eyes searched frantically for the trail. The front porch was already buried under a fresh drift, but I knelt down, shielding my face against the immediate sting of the snow. There it was, still outside the bathroom window on the other side of the perimeter. The oily black and crimson slime was already freezing, but it hadn't been buried yet. It was distinct, lying on the otherwise clean snow like spilled ink. It didn't just drip, it looked like something had slithered. I followed it, sinking immediately into the drifts up to my knees. The air was so cold that it burned my lungs. I kept the Remington high. Its barrel was a dark, steady presence against the blinding white. The trail, growing in width as I followed it, led past the woodpile and headed directly for the tree line. The trees themselves were black specters against the night, swaying and groaning under the weight of the snow. I fought against the resistance of the deep snow, pushing myself faster, driven by the metallic reek of the slime that, even in the freezing air, seemed to linger. I was maybe 20 yards from the cabin, battling a sudden heavy gust when I saw it. At first, I thought it was a buck, driven mad by the storm. It was easily that size, low to the ground, its dark shape barely discernible in the whirling vortex of snow where the cabin's clearing met the forest edge. But it didn't move like a deer. It didn't trot or bound, it scuttled. It was hunkered down, its massive body creating a brief moment of stillness in the blizzard, a small black shadow against the white fury. I stopped dead, sinking deeper into the drift. I raised the shotgun, pushing the safety off with a dry click. Through the shifting veil of snow, I strained to make out details, and the details that I found were strange. It was hairy, thick black fur matted and clotted. The fur was plastered down in clumps, matted thick with the same crimson slime that lined the floor of my bathroom. Its bulk seemed to be expanding, the hair giving it an immense, distorted volume, but the low, hunched posture suggested that it was something that preferred to crawl. It had multiple limbs, too many, working in sync to move it along the ground. Thick, jointed appendages that glistened unnervingly. The sight was a sickening contradiction. The heavy, dense covering of fur mixed with the raw, unnatural sheen of the slime. It looked like a living, wet wound covered in an animal's coat. And then it lifted something, its head. I realized with a shudder of pure dread. It was impossibly large and angular, but I couldn't discern a face. And then the wind cleared the snow just enough for me to see a flash of wet, sickly red where eyes or a mouth should have been, reflecting the distant, faint light from my cabin window. It didn't see me. It seemed focused entirely on the darkness of the tree line, already beginning to merge with the shadows. It was moving still low and fast, dragging its huge, repulsive body away from the cabin and toward the mountain pass that led to town. I gripped the shotgun, ignoring the trembling of my own body. The blizzard had made the shot difficult, but the distance was short. If I let it reach the shelter of the trees, it would be gone. I took the slack out of the trigger. There was no hesitation left in me, just the immediate, primal need to stop this monstrosity before it vanished. I squeezed the trigger. The sound of the Remington going off was deafening, a violent boom that shattered the stillness of the storm. The flash of the muzzle momentarily burned the image of the creature into my retina. I felt the powerful kick of the shotgun against my shoulder, and a split second later, the buckshot slammed into the creature's massive torso. It didn't go down. Instead, the thing let out a sound that cut right through the howling wind, a screaming wail that was entirely inorganic, like tearing metal on a wet, ripping canvas. It was a noise of pain, but also of inhuman rage, and it sent a spike of pure terror through my chest. The section of its body where the shot hit seemed to absorb the impact, scattering the spray of the thick dark slime into few clumps of matted hair into the air. It scrambled, the monstrous body, for all its bulk, moved with terrifying speed, abandoning the relatively clear ground and lunging into the dense black of the tree line. I pumped the action, ejecting the spent shell, and loaded a fresh round. I didn't wait to see if it was mortally wounded. I just knew that I had to keep it moving, keep it from burrowing down or reaching the pass. I plunged into the forest after it, following the fresh, dark disturbance in the snow. The trees offered a brief, deceptive shield from the worst of the wind, but the snow was deeper here, making every step a labor. I focused only on the trail, the churned snow, the scattered slime, the deep, heavy indentations of its multiple limbs. I ran until my lungs burned, until the cold made the skin on my face ache, until the sound of its desperate, laborious breathing were drowned out by my own. And then I stopped. The trail vanished. One moment I was following a distinct line of destruction. The next, the snow was pristine, only marked by my own clumsy boot prints. I moved forward a few more steps, scanning the blizzard-shrouded ground, wondering if the heavy snow had worked against me and buried the signs. But no, the trail hadn't slowly faded. It had ended completely, as if the creature had simply dissolved into the air. I rotated slowly, the shotgun trembling slightly in my grip, my eyes uselessly searching the area around me. My breath hitched. I caught it only as an indistinct smear of shadow, a sudden movement in my peripheral vision, high above me. I tilted my head back, staring up into the shifting, wind-whipped canopy of the pines. There was no ground trail because the trail had continued up. The dark, oily slime wasn't on the snow anymore. It was smeared high on the bark of the nearest trees, running in sickening vertical streaks. The monster hadn't been slowed. It had simply used the vertical space the forest had offered. It had the high ground. It was above, hidden by the night and the dense pine needles, and I was exposed beneath it. My heart hammered against my ribs. I had gone from the hunter to the obvious, slow-moving target. I scanned the dark trunks of the nearest pines, searching for any break, any shelter that might afford me a moment of cover. About 10 feet away, a massive ancient pine had been partially uprooted long ago, its gnarled root system exposed. The dirt and thick woody roots had formed a dark, protective cave against the elements. I dove toward it, dropping to my hands and knees in the snow. I wedged myself into the space beneath the largest root, pulling the shotgun close to my chest. My back pressed against the cold, frozen earth. I held perfectly still, straining my ears against the wind, forcing myself to shrink into the shadows and the earth. It was silent again, save for the storm. The vast black space between the high branches and the low earth was now where the true danger lay. I looked up through an opening in the uplifted roots, seeing only the tangled darkness. I waited for a drop of slime, a tremor of a branch, or the silent, horrifying moment when that massive, hairy, glistening shape would descend. I stayed perfectly still, trying to slow the panicked rush of my breath. The silence, punctuated only by the wind, was unbearable. The creature was somewhere above, hunting for the man that had just fired the loud, disruptive weapon. And then the snow began to sift down, not from the storm but from the branches above. Chunks fell, followed by a sudden, heavy thud just yards away. It had dropped. The creature was on the ground again, but now it wasn't scrambling away, it was waddling. A fast, deliberate, low-to-the-earth movement, like a massive, glistening insect trying to appear harmless. Its bulk seemed even more immense now that it was no longer distorted by the heights, and I could hear the wet squelching sound of its many appendages on the snow. It moved slowly into the small clearing around my hiding spot. I was pressed so tightly against the frozen roots that the wood dug painfully into my spine, but I didn't dare flinch. I had already positioned the Remington. My shooting hand gripped the trigger. The barrel angled slightly up and out toward the opening of the root cave, resting against the snow-covered ground. The creature's movement was erratic, darting toward the tree line one moment and then pulling back. Why hasn't it found me? And then I realized it wasn't looking for me. Its massive, misshapen head was constantly sniffing the air, lifting and twisting with jerky movements. The air was thick with a howling blizzard and the scent of damp pine and frozen earth. The storm was masking my scent. The wind and the heavy blowing snow were scattering and nullifying my presence, covering the fresh trace of gunpowder and adrenaline. I was lucky. The storm had become my unintentional ally. After a few minutes, the sniffing paid off. The waddling ceased, and its massive, slimy, hairy form turned directly toward my root cave. It approached the gap between the thick roots, filling the dark space with its bulk. It was so close that I could feel the minute vibrations of its weight disturbing the ground. And then its head lowered. The snow cleared just long enough for me to see the details that I hadn't been able to discern in the blizzard. Its head was roughly the size of a buck or a moose skull, but hideously wrong. The bone structure was too broad, too blunt. It had no discernible eyes, just wide swaths of slick, wet flesh the color of old blood. It wasn't just fur that covered it. Its thick, dark hair was matted with the slime, forming a repulsive, heavy mane. Interspersed within this mane were a horrifying number of short, glistening, leech-like appendages that writhed slightly in the cold air, tasting and searching. And then it was inches from my face. I could smell the metallic stench of the black slime mixed with the sour, coppery odor of raw meat. I was looking into the mouth of the nightmare that had walked out of a man. One of the slick, worm-like appendages darted out, brushing against the tip of my nose. In that instant, it knew. The thing recoiled slightly, its large, blunt head drawing back, the wet flesh of its face tightening into an expression of immediate, primal recognition. The meal was found, the obstacle identified. It was about to strike. But I didn't let it. I drove the barrel of the Remington up and sideways, the muzzle nearly touching the side of its monstrous head. The blast was muffled and wet, an awful contained thunder. The buckshot tore into the creature's skull from below when the thing erupted. A horrifying geyser of black slime, wet fur, and bone fragments sprayed into the roots above me. The creature shuddered once, a massive, muscular tremor before its great weight collapsed. It didn't fall on me, thankfully, but it landed directly outside my hiding spot, its massive body completely blocking the entrance. I lowered the shotgun, the noise of the ringing in my ears louder than the wind. I was trapped beneath a mountain of steaming, reeking horror. The ringing in my ears faded slowly, replaced by the sickening sound of hot, wet matter sizzling on frozen snow. I was entombed. The creature's immense, cooling mass was pressed against the root system, sealing the entrance to my makeshift bunker. I could hear the wind now, muffled by the sheer volume of dead, hairy flesh. I lowered the shotgun slowly, my entire body shaking with a delayed, violent reaction. The smell was overwhelming now. A blast of copper, sulfur, and the sour stink of the creature's slime. The muzzle of the Remington was coated in it. I had to get out. If the blizzard kept up, I'd be trapped here beneath a rotting carcass until the spring melt. I shoved the shotgun's barrel against the creature's flank, testing the weight. No movement. It was like pushing a felled, waterlogged oak tree. I shifted my weight, reaching with my free hand, and finally found the edge of the root that had protected me. I pressed my shoulder against the dirt wall and pushed, straining. The corpse moved an inch and then sank back. I had to try a different way. I turned the shotgun around and used the thick, heavy butt of the stock to scrape away the dirt and packed snow behind me, burrowing deeper into the root system. The ground was hard and frozen, but the shotgun butt gave me just enough leverage to widen a small, cramped gap between two lateral roots. Gasping, I barely squeezed through the opening. I emerged on the far side of the massive pine away from the creature's bulk. I stood up slowly, my heartbeat pounding in my temples, and I walked back over to look at the kill. It lay motionless, its multi-limbed body contorted awkwardly on the snow. But something was wrong. Where the head had been, there was only a ruin of black fur and pulped bone. Yet a thin, milky white steam was rising from the wound. And then I noticed the blood or lack of it. It wasn't bleeding out. The dark black-red slime was only slowly oozing, congealing almost immediately in the bitter cold. The buckshot had caused massive trauma, but the creature's internal volume seemed insufficient for its size. It felt like I had shot a sack of thick fluid rather than a complex biological organism. My eyes caught something on the creature's massive flank, where the first blast of buckshot had hit it. The matted fur had been stripped clean, revealing the skin beneath. It was pale, slick, and thin, stretched tight over the enormous frame. The skin was visibly healing and slowly knitting itself back together. The gaping holes from the shot were shrinking, the raw, pink-red tissue pulling toward a center point. It was a terrifying, impossible regeneration. The steam wasn't from cooling blood. It was from a burning internal process. My breath hitched. The entire premise of this battle that a shotgun could stop it was a lie. I had maybe 10 minutes before it was functional again. I had to get back to the cabin, not just for ammunition, but for something heavier, something more final. I turned and ran like a madman, the snow swallowing my footing, the low branches whipping my face. The familiar trek back to the cabin was a blur of white and black, driven by the cold fear that the monster would simply stand up behind me. I burst through the door, slamming it shut and throwing the deadbolt, though I knew a simple piece of metal wouldn't hold that bulk for long. I raced past the bathroom and into the storage closet. I didn't grab the deer rifle. A bullet was a coin toss, but fire was a guarantee. And tucked behind the winter tires were 2 red 5-gallon jerry cans, one for the snowmobile, one for the backup generator. I grabbed the can of kerosene too. It would burn slower and hotter than gasoline, and I yanked it out. Next, I needed a wick. I dove into the kitchen, grabbed the thickest rag that I could find, a towel that I used for drying dishes, and I stuffed it into my pocket. The light was my last stop. I opened the kitchen drawer and snagged a long, thin butane lighter used for starting the pilot light. I was ready, but not fast enough. The quiet, heavy silence that I had endured for the past few months was broken up by a sound that I had only heard when cutting down trees. A slow, heavy ripping sound coming from the side of the cabin. the side where the bathroom window was. It had found its way back. The hole that it had created to exit the young man's body wasn't large enough for its current monstrous size, and it wasn't trying to climb through the window. It was tearing the wall apart. I could hear the sickening crunch of frozen pine breaking and the sound of thick wood snapping. I had to assume that it was fully healed or close enough to it. The storm, which had given me cover, now threatened to bury me inside my own cabin if I wasn't careful. I had to take the fire to the monster. I yanked the front door open, the kerosene can heavy and cold in my hand, and I plunged back out into the blizzard. The creature wasn't at the door. I rounded the corner of the cabin, the heavy kerosene sloshing, and I saw the damage. A huge section of the wall near the bathroom was ruined. Wood splintered and insulation streaming out like cotton guts. The creature was there, its massive steaming head pulled back from the shredded wall. It saw me instantly. The bluff of the blizzard had been called. I was standing in the open and it was less than 20 feet away. It began its repulsive, slow waddle toward me. Its limbs churned the snow, the black slime glistened. Its regenerating head tilted low. It was honed in on me. I dropped to a knee, pulling the heavy can close. I twisted the plastic cap off and then tore the towel from my pocket, shoving one end into the neck of the can to soak. The stench of the oil and the creature's musk mingled horribly in the cold air. The monster was 10 feet away. I didn't try to aim, I just tipped the heavy can and began to drench the path between us as I walked backwards. I emptied half the 5 gallons in a wide black arc right into the snow and across the creature's forelimbs. The kerosene didn't mix with the snow. It simply stained it, turning the white ground into a shimmering black slick. The creature didn't stop. It waddled right through the flammable pool, its greasy fur absorbing the oil. As the beast closed the distance, close enough now that I could feel the steam emanating off of it, I pulled the soaked towel out and threw the can aside, and I flicked the butane lighter. The thin blue flame fought the wind for a fraction of a second and then it held. With a final, desperate roar to myself, I lit the kerosene-soaked rag like a torch, and I threw it directly at the monster. It hit the creature's torso and the effect was instantaneous and brutal. The oil-soaked fur and the slick, saturated snow trail ignited with a violent whoosh. The flames were furious, a shocking blast of orange and red against the white snow. The creature was engulfed in a terrible screaming pillar of fire. The kerosene and the creature's own slick, greasy essence fed the flames instantly, making them burn with a blinding hot intensity. The monster shrieked, a sound of agony and pure animal terror, and began to thrash violently in the fire. It wasn't waddling anymore, it was rolling in the snow, trying to beat out the inferno. Fortunately for me, the flames stuck to its oiled coat like glue. It was a chaotic, burning silhouette against the backdrop of the swirling blizzard. The thick black smoke was lost immediately in the swirling white. I backed away. The heat of the fire was a shocking contrast to the bitter cold. I watched the creature convulse, unable to stop the burning, unable to heal what was being systematically destroyed. The smell of burning hair, oil, and something metallic sweet was nauseating. Finally, after a minute that felt like an hour, the thrashing had stopped. The creature lay still, a massive charred monument to my desperate resolve. The fire still raged, but the movement was gone. I leaned against the icy wood of the cabin, the shotgun forgotten at my feet. The flames were already starting to melt a ring of snow around the body, but the blizzard had continued to rage. The intense heat from the burning carcass was already beginning to recede, fighting a losing battle against the continuous onslaught of the blizzard. I stood for a moment, letting the sheer exhaustion wash over me, before the pragmatism and determination of the mountain man kicked in. The fire was dying and what was left of this thing couldn't be allowed to heal or even to rot here. I grabbed the heavy kerosene can and emptied the last of its contents onto the smoldering pile. coaxing the flames back into a furious, consuming roar. I moved the equipment inside and then returned to the blazing carcass with my axe. It took a sickening 15 minutes of hacking and separating what little was left of the creature's bulk. I dragged the black, escaping chunks through the snow and tossed them back into the heart of the blaze. The air was thick with the stench of oil and the sweet, terrible smell of burning meat. I was purging the mountain of this evil. When I was done, only a patch of melted snow and a few glowing embers remained. I stood over the pyre, the axe handle cold in my numb hands, watching the last of the embers fade into the furious white. I turned, intending to head back inside, locked the doors, and faced the grim reality of the split body in the bathroom. And that's when I heard it. It wasn't the wind and it wasn't the groan of a tree. It was a faint, wet screaming wail, identical to the sound the creature had made when the buckshot had first hit it. The sound of ripping canvas and tearing metal. It came from the same direction as the first time, from the depths of the tree line, from where the young man had come. I spun around, bringing the axe up like a shield, searching the blinding, swirling storm. My mind immediately went to the rifle, the thing that I had left behind in the house in my haste. I had nothing but a bloody, snow-covered axe and a dead fire. The wail came again, closer this time, high-pitched and choked. I took a step backward, preparing to fight, when a memory finally pierced the fog of panic. The young man's vacant eyes. The young man's vacant story. I was hiking with my girlfriend.